So my friends and I, whom I'll refer to for anonymity's sake as A, E, S, and D, have been getting into paranormal investigations over the past few years. We aren't professionals by any means, nor do we claim to be. It's just something that we enjoy doing whenever we're able to get together. We've gone to a few supposedly haunted locations and done some investigations, but nothing prepared us for what we experienced here. So one day, we were discussing where we should go for our next paranormal investigation. We had just finished another investigation a couple of nights prior, so we were still feeling pretty brave from that. As we were discussing where we should go, one of our friends suggested that we should check out this old abandoned school in rural Tennessee. We had heard stories about this school from videos on YouTube, and from just online searches as well. If you know the story about the boy who was bullied to death and buried underneath the floorboards, then you'll know what school that I'm referring to. If you don't know the story, then here's a brief summary. A young boy was cornered in the boys' bathroom at this school by a bully, apparently. The bully beat him up so badly that he ended up succumbing to his injuries and died on the spot. The bully, in a panic, realizing what he had just done, decided to pull up some of the floorboards with his pocket knife and stash the body underneath them. Because of how brutal it was, it is said that something very dark and malevolent is haunting the school, as well as the boy. Some even speculate that this dark spirit is what drove the bully to take it so far and kill the boy in the first place. Sadly, our friend A wasn't able to come with us on this investigation, so I invited another one of my friends, who I'll refer to as H. H wasn't really into the paranormal, I guess you could say, like the rest of us are, but agreed to come anyways, just to hang out and to have something to do. So we all got into our cars and drove to this school, hoping to have some paranormal experiences and maybe even catch us some paranormal evidence that we could show off online. When we got to the school, we quickly realized that the pictures and the videos that we had seen online did not do the real thing justice. It was really creepy. The entire place was covered in shrubbery, vines, and graffiti. The windows had been busted out and the doors were off their hinges, presumably from all the local kids looking to get a rush by breaking into and exploring a creepy abandoned school. We walked around the school and eventually found the entrance to the basement, which apparently you are not supposed to go into, especially the boiler room. Not just because the whole building was on the brink of collapse, but also because that's where it primarily lives. So, of course, that's one of the first places that we wanted to go. We walked around the basement and did some exploring, just to survey the area and to get a better idea of where we wanted to begin our investigation. We eventually did find the boiler room, and at first glance it didn't seem like anything special, just some broken down equipment, graffitied walls, trash thrown all over the place, and a random school chair sitting in the corner. E laughed at some point and made the comment, must not be a very powerful spirit if this is where it has to live. We all let out a bit of a chuckle in agreement, and continued on our way through the basement. Thinking back now, that may have not been the best comment to make about this thing and its home. We exited the basement and went into the main area of the school. The main area? It really wasn't any better than the basement. Graffiti and trash were everywhere. The ceiling was falling in, the floor was collapsing in some areas. We explored the halls eventually, some classrooms, the gym, and we even found the bathroom where the bullied boy was supposedly buried underneath the floorboards. After exploring for a little while longer, we decided to start our investigation proper. We set up a couple of cameras, motion sensor lights, and voice recorders in some of the classrooms, the hall, and the bathroom. As we were doing our investigation, 3 of us were in one of the classrooms while myself and H were in the hall right outside. The 3 of us that were in the classroom, we were just playing around with some dowsing rods and a spirit box. If you don't know what dowsing rods are, they are basically 2 copper rods that can spin freely, and they're used as a way for spirits to communicate with you, either by crossing the rods or pointing. The spirit box, that's a device that quickly cycles through radio waves and allows spirits to talk through the frequencies. Now, as they were asking their questions in the classroom, myself and H, we were staring down the hall. At the end of this hall is what we assumed was a staircase, but we couldn't be too sure because we couldn't reach that area due to the floor having collapsed. As myself and our friend were looking down this hall, we suddenly heard a loud bang come from the far end where the staircase was. We quickly shined our lights in the direction of the noise, but we didn't see anything. We kept watching for a minute, just in case something or someone came out. But after a couple of minutes of nothing, we sort of just assumed that it must have been an animal or a rat or something like that. Eventually, I made my way into the classroom with the others while H stayed in the hall. As we were asking our questions and hoping for a response through the dowsing rods or the spirit box, I noticed H in the hall. He was all of a sudden ghostly white and fixated on the area where we had heard the noise prior. I asked him what was wrong, if he was okay, to which he says, "I don't want to freak you guys out, but I could have swore that I just saw someone poke their head out from around that corner and look right at me." We were all kind of like, "Oh, it's probably just your mind playing tricks on you," but he was still very insistent on what he saw. Now, we had seen and heard things during our investigations before, but something about the way H looked had us all a little bit spooked now. H insisted that we move on to another area, so we obliged him and went back to the main foyer where we had entered. We were standing there talking about where we should go next when we hear what sounded like a child's laugh coming from the classroom where we had just been. We all instinctively shut up and froze in place. Finally, our friend S broke the silence. What was that? Eventually, he built up the courage to go and see what it was. He started making his way back to the classroom when something told me that it really wasn't safe for him to go back in there. I quickly grabbed his arm and said, "Hey man, I don't think that's a good idea." To which he brushed it off and proceeded to head towards the classroom. A split second later, we heard a loud crunch and a crash come from the room, so we all ran to see what it was. When we reached the classroom, we were horrified to see that the floor had collapsed right where we had been standing moments earlier. Had something not told me that it wasn't safe, I wouldn't have grabbed E's arm, and honestly, he probably would have been at the bottom of the school right now. If not dead, then at least very hurt. As we stood there, in shock of what had just happened, we began to feel, I guess, very grateful that the floor hadn't collapsed while we were all standing in there. We decided that, honestly, that was enough of the classrooms, and we made our way into the gym. The floors felt much safer in there, that's for sure. We continued our investigation, and thinking back now, we probably should have left after our friend almost died, but we were dumb and we wanted to go on. I took the dowsing rods and began asking those generic questions. Is anyone there? Can you tell us your name? Etc. Eventually I asked the question, can you point to where you are? And to my surprise, the rods pointed in the direction of the darker corner of the gym. Guys, come here, I shouted to my friends. I think I'm getting something. As my friends came closer, the rods began to move as well. Now they weren't pointing in the corner anymore. They were seemingly following E. Now might be a good time to mention too that this is the same guy who almost fell through the floor, and the guy who made the silly comment in the basement about this thing's home. I'm not saying that he was being targeted by this thing, but it sure seemed like it at this point. It was weird too, because no matter where he moved, the rods, they seemed to follow him. He went left, they followed. He went right, they followed. He ran around me and they followed full circle. This creeped us out beyond belief, so we wanted to know why the rods were following him. As we asked our questions as to why the rods were doing this, someone eventually asked, "Are you mad at him?" And then, in an instant, the rods went straight and unnaturally still, and the room, it felt really eerily quiet. So quiet, in fact, that it was as if we had fallen deaf almost instantaneously. I got this insanely bad feeling as if something very evil had just entered the room. I get goosebumps thinking about this. A few seconds later, I felt something strong physically grab the ends of the rod in my hands. Whatever was grabbing them began thrashing them back and forth with enough force to move my whole body, as if they were trying to break them from my grip. As this was happening, noises started coming from all around the school too. It sounded like doors and lockers were slamming, things being thrown down the halls and all around us, and screaming. Though admittedly the screaming may have been coming from us, but it didn't help our situation by any means, that's for sure. We were all terrified. We had never experienced anything like this before. Then H, the same guy who saw the thing at the end of the hall, pointed in the direction of the dark corner of the gym and let out a guttural, blood-curdling scream. We didn't even bother to look and see what he was pointing and screaming at. The only thing in our mind at this point was get out. We all quickly grabbed our things simultaneously and sprinted out of the school back to our cars. We got in and we peeled out of there as fast as we could. Eventually, we met back at my place, still obviously shaken up by what had just happened. After taking a while to process this experience and decompress a bit, we asked H what he had seen. And he tells us that as everything was going on, he looked into the corner of the gym and saw something horrifying. He described it as seeing a massive thing, probably 7 feet tall, standing in the corner. It had allegedly unnaturally long arms that were spread out wide. Its head had long devilish horns, and its mouth was open so wide that you could probably fit your head into it. He said, though, that on top of that, on its unusually large mouth, was also a smile, more evil than you could ever imagine. And knowing that something like that was so close to us, honestly, is just bone-chilling. In my opinion, we were lucky to make it out alive that day. We've never returned to that school, and we have no intention on ever going back to. As far as we're concerned, if that old school was demolished and the rubble was burned, they'd be doing the world a favor. Maybe it would destroy or, at the very least, trap whatever that thing was in there for good. If you know the school, then I highly suggest that you never go inside, or even go onto the property, in fact. Honestly, save yourself from the trauma. Believe what you want, obviously, but that night for us will forever be burned into our minds. This happened in 2019. I was 25 at the time. I was living with my parents, sister, and my partner, as we were saving up to buy a house at this point. My parents' house was in a relatively big city in California, which has a big homeless population. The house was on a street that dead end to a park, which was a common hangout spot for homeless people. There were always homeless people walking by our house, of which most of them never caused any problems. Now, the other piece of backstory that you need to know before I get into this is that my sister is special needs. She, despite being 19 at the time, appeared both physically and mentally more like a 10-year-old, I guess you could say. This particular day, my mum and I had taken our dogs to the vet. My partner was at work, and my dad was working in the backyard. This left my sister kind of alone in the house. When my mum and I came back from the vet, my sister opened the door and greeted us, saying, "This is my friend Julia." And behind her stood a woman who looked like she was probably in her 20s. She had my sister's socks on and was eating food from our house. This was confusing because The woman could have been a friend of my sister's, as she was in a lot of programs for adults with special needs, and we didn't necessarily know all of her friends. But my sister also has a limited vocabulary to explain situations with. So my mum says, "Oh, you know my daughter?" Julia says, "We're getting to know each other." And that was a huge nope. My mum says, "How are you getting to know her?" Julia answers, "Oh, well, I just live on the corner." "You live around the corner?" "No, I live on the corner. I needed a tampon, so your daughter let me in." At this point, my mum is speechless. I've never seen her speechless, in fact, in my life, and I'm whispering to her, "Get her out." Julia is kind of pacing around grabbing more food from our kitchen. She's acting erratically like she's on drugs. I again tell my mum to get her out. My mum says, "I know that, but if she has a knife or a gun or something, I need to do it carefully." My mum follows Julia into the kitchen and says, "I'm so sorry, you need to leave because I need to go run an errand." Julia, she ignores this request. At this point, I look in our bathroom where there is a pile of Julia's things. Again, my mum tells her that she needs to leave. Julia agrees and goes into our bathroom and locks the door. She was in there for a while. It felt like forever, in fact, but maybe it was around 5 minutes. We were pretty certain that she was doing drugs in there, but finally Julia has all of her stuff and she leaves, taking socks and snacks with her. I run to get my dad and we all debrief. It seems like, from what we can get out of my sister, is that Julia knocked on the door and asked for a tampon, in which my sister lets her in, trying to be helpful. Julia then realizes that she's practically alone with what looks like a child and takes full advantage, stealing clothes and shoes from us. We have a serious talk with my sister and tell her that she can never open doors for strangers like that ever again. And we spend the next few months worrying that Julia spread the news that our house was an easy house to get into. This happened in northwest Houston. I've never really spoken about this one, as much as I had a much more frightening experience that takes precedence in my memory. But this one, it is weird enough to ask you guys what happened. So, I've only had one other paranormal experience, and after doing some research, I believe it was demonic. Well, there was another experience around the same time, within a few months of each other, and no paranormal experiences before or after these two, where me and my middle school friend were having a sleepover. We got a craving for snacks and decided to walk to the closest gas station. The walk was about 1.5 miles and included a walk through the woods behind our neighborhood. We cut across the creek and turned right, which led to a road, but the road was at least 3/4 of a mile away with dense woods on both sides of us. As we're walking, we were about 1/4 of a mile into this long stretch of woods. All of a sudden, this giant white figure steps out of the woods to our left. We both freeze in our tracks without saying a word, confirming that we both saw it, and it stopped and stared right at us. It was probably about 50 to 60 feet away from us, but it was absolutely massive. So it seemed a bit closer than that, I suppose, but I got instantly flooded with chills, and we both turned around and started sprinting back to where we crossed the creek, repeatedly saying, "What was that?" We never looked back out of pure fear, and all we could seemingly do was just, well, run. Whatever it was, though, it was built like a human, I guess, standing on 2 legs and had distinct yellowish eyes. It was easily, and I mean easily, 9 feet tall, and we don't have any sort of animals that would have resembled that in the area. Me and that old friend, we lost touch, unfortunately. This was like 14 years ago, but I really wish I could reach out to him to talk about that moment again, because I know that he still remembers it just like I do. But can anyone add some insight? I find it sort of weird that I had 2 paranormal experiences within months of each other, and nothing before or since then. I get chills just talking about this and reliving that memory, but I'm really curious if anyone has any ideas. Just to clarify too, we were not drunk, high, or anything, stone cold sober. We were too young at the time to do any of that stuff yet, and so there was nothing like that involved. So again, if you have any idea as to what this was, then please do let me know. So, to give some context, this story takes place at a campground where myself and others have had some strange experiences, but those stories are going to have to wait for another time. When I was around 12 years old though, I accompanied my father to our family's longtime campground where he was going to perform some lawn care work before the camping season began later that month. We were probably going to be there for a while, so I asked my dad if I could invite my friend to come with us, just to keep me entertained while he finished up some mowing. To my delight, my dad agreed and said that he could come. For privacy purposes, I'll be referring to my friend as D. Now, Dee and I had been friends for years at this point, and had many of the same interests. Among those common interests was our curiosity for the unknown and the paranormal. So while my dad was busy mowing, I suggested to Dee that we should try to do some EVP recordings in the cafeteria, just to see if we could capture anything, to which he happily agreed. The cafeteria was a 2-story cement and brick building, with the upstairs being where the kitchen and dining hall were, and the basement, otherwise known as the dungeon. It was an old dorm that was being mostly used for storage at this stage, with a very big and dimly lit storage room as well, a long hall, a smaller storage room, and a rather large bathroom. The whole atmosphere down there always gave me the creeps too. Anyway, myself and Dee made our way into the dining hall and sat down at one of the tables. We got out my old flip phone and started using the voice recording app to see if we could catch any voices or other unexplained sounds. We took turns asking questions and waiting for responses for about 5 minutes, but to no avail. Until we heard some noises coming from the dungeon. We discussed going down there to see what the noise was, but we chalked it up to being an animal, since it wasn't very uncommon for animals to get into the buildings at this campground. So for the most part, we just brushed it off, I guess you could say. We continued with our makeshift EVP session for about another 5 minutes, until we heard another noise coming from the same dungeon. But this time, we both froze in place. We looked at each other in shock and, what were we hearing? My friend looks at me and says, "Is that chanting?" At this point, we were both pretty freaked out, and we decided to exit the cafeteria and just go on a walk. As we were walking, we were speculating what the sounds we heard could have been. I did my best to come to some logical explanation as to what we were hearing. There was no way that there were people down there. We would have seen or heard them beforehand, right? As we continued our walk, we ended up about 60 yards from the backside of the cafeteria, where we could see a door with a window that led into the dungeon. We both looked at the door and didn't see anything weird, so we kept walking. I made the mistake of saying to Dee, how scary would it have been if we looked at the door and saw someone looking back, as a bit of a joke. And immediately, I kid you not, after saying this, we both looked back at the door, fully expecting nothing to be there, but to our horror, something was there. Not just something, though. There were multiple people. I instantly froze in place, terrified of what I was seeing. There were 3 people that we could see, and they appeared to be in what looked like cloaks of some sort. 1 in a red cloak and 2 in black on the other side, staring directly back at us. One of the scarier parts, though, was that I never even saw their faces, just the hoods that they were wearing. Before I could even ask Dee if he was seeing what I was seeing, I looked to see him in full sprint down the road about 50 yards in front of me. so instinctively, I started running too. We ran to tell my dad what we had heard and seen, to which he pretty much brushed it off, but said that he would go and check it out just to ease our minds. Now, my dad is not a man to be messed with. He was a 6'5" cop and almost 300 pounds, so just his sheer size would be enough to pretty much intimidate or scare someone off if they were trespassing. My dad went and checked the dungeon as we watched from a distance. He came back out saying that everything was fine and he didn't see or hear anyone in there. We were still a little bit freaked out, but glad that he had said that there was nothing to worry about and nobody was there. So we continued with our day until it was time to leave, but we definitely steered clear of the cafeteria. Flash forward about 8 years, and I had mostly forgotten about the whole thing. But one night, my older brother, who was older than me by about 7 years, and we were up late one night, sitting on our parents' back deck, just reminiscing about the times that we had growing up. We eventually got to talking about spooky stuff that had happened to us, and that brought us to talking about our experiences at the campgrounds. I proceeded to tell my brother the story about Dee and I seeing and hearing the people in the cloaks in the dungeon. My brother then gets a sort of very perplexed and somewhat scared look on his face and says to me, "You're joking, right?" To which I said, "No, I wish I was. You can ask Dee and he'll tell you the same thing." My brother, getting more and more freaked out by the story that I'm telling him, proceeds to tell me something that, honestly, has haunted me to this day. He tells me that when I was about 2 years old, apparently a satanic cult had broken into the campground. The cultists had gone through every dorm and the church, gathered all of the Bibles, and taken them to the field, which was directly on the other side of the road from where myself and Dee had seen the people in the window. He tells me that they had burned a massive pentagram into the field, piled all the Bibles in the middle, and allegedly set them on fire. The next day, a couple of workers had gone to the campgrounds to do some regular maintenance, and they had found what had been done. They called the police, and according to my brother, they not only found the pile of burnt Bibles inside of this massive pentagram, but they also found the remains of dead animals all around it in a sort of ritualistic pattern. Nobody had heard or seen anything more about the cult since then, until I told my dad and my brother what Dee and I had experienced. Flash forward to today, so 11 years since what we had experienced, and nobody has heard or seen anything else that we know of anyway. So, did Dee and I just imagine what we had experienced, or did we happen to interrupt another cult gathering of some sort? After hearing what my brother told me and comparing it to what we saw, I find it hard to believe anything other than the latter. I was about 13 when this happened. My parents were gone for a weekend for a trip together and left me and my 2 siblings home alone. Our grandma was a minute down the road if we needed her, and my sister was 18 at the time, so it really wasn't a big deal for a night or two. I was in the spare bedroom, which had a couch, TV, and Xbox 360 in it, that I was really into playing or used to watching Netflix on. It was the summer of 2015, by the way. I was watching some random show. Knowing me, it was probably The Vampire Diaries at the time, and it was maybe 9 or 10 at night. And that was when I heard it. 3 knocks on the window. I ignored it at first, just thinking that it was a little bit weird, and just keep scrolling through the memes on my iPod and watching TV when it happened again, which is about the time when I started freaking out. The windows in the room had curtains over them, so I didn't see who it was, but I knew that I needed to get out of there now. I went to get my older sister and told her what was happening, and as I moved through the house, the knocking on our windows followed me, knocking 3 times every single time. She and my brother heard the knocking on the glass too, and started freaking out with me. My sister had me and my brother hide in the corner of our kitchen that doesn't have any windows looking in and made sure our front door was locked. We called our parents and then our grandma. They had us call our next door neighbor to take a quick look around. He was a Vietnam vet in his 60s at the time, and we knew that he had guns and training if needed. But he didn't find anything. We were all unsettled the rest of the night, but we knew that our parents were coming home the next day, so we weren't too worried. Fortunately, everything was okay and it never happened again. But to this day, about a decade later, it still bothers me not knowing who it was. I have 3 theories, which was progressively less probable, I guess. It could have been a man that was doing horrible things to me through the summer or winter, but I don't think he'd be bold enough to get that close to my house, not knowing who was home. That's a whole nother story. And the final option was my biological father, who was barely in the picture at the time. Again, I don't know who it was, but the whole thing was really creepy, and I'm glad that my sister was there that day because, honestly, I don't know what I would have done without her. We've had our cabin in the mountains since 1966. It was my father's heaven on earth because he grew up close by and had to leave home at a young age to go to VA school for the deaf and blind. He had detached retinas. Anyway, he died in 1995 of leukemia, but made my sisters and I promise that we'd take care of the cabin before he passed. In 2005, my sister who lives in Texas called me on a Saturday, asking if my other sister and I were at the cabin. I said, no, but we're going next weekend. Why? And she said that she had gotten a missed call from the cabin landline on her cell phone, called back and no answer. I was like, it's possible our uncle was over checking on stuff, but I'd cancelled long-distance service a few months prior because we only used the phone for local calls and to have in case of 911. So I thought maybe they took it off the bill, but LD was still active on the phone. I called the cabin number and no answer, so called my uncle's house. He answered and said that he hadn't been over there since the last time we visited, but he'd go check on it just in case our neighbor was over there for a problem. It's a remote house, and you have to go through the neighbor's land to reach it. After a while, he called back saying that apparently nobody was there, and he had tried to call me from there but couldn't because there was no LD. He also checked with our neighbor, and they hadn't been there either. I called my sister back, and I told her that it couldn't have come from the cabin because our uncle hadn't been there, and he verified that LD wasn't working anyway. She was adamant, though, that it came from that number, said that it was in her call history even. We both ended up half-jokingly saying that it must have been Daddy calling her. When we hung up, I laid my cell phone down beside me and said out loud, "Daddy, call me." Sounds stupid, I know, but I felt jealous that he would call her and not me. And I kid you not, my phone immediately rings, and the screen says unknown caller. I was like, oh heck no, thinking that this couldn't be happening. With chills and bumps on my arms, I picked up and I could hear nothing but static and what sounded like several people's voices from far away. I kept saying hello, hello, but just could hear nothing but static and those faraway voices. After a few seconds comes this loud voice like someone had the receiver right up to their mouth, but it didn't sound like my father, saying like mimicking the sound of a buzzer going off when a wrong answer is given on the game show or whatever, sort of like gotcha, and the call disconnected. I called my sister back immediately, absolutely freaking out at this point. She said that it has to be Dad trying to warn us that something is wrong. We really didn't know what to think, and it almost felt like we both had imagined it all, but we could see the calls on our phones, the call history. She said maybe he called her instead of me and my sister because she would have paid attention to a VA number living in Texas, whereas my sister and we might not have paid attention. She insisted, though, that we check everything out when we went back up there, and was convinced that he was trying to send a warning. The next weekend, my other sister and I went to the cabin for our already planned trip. Our uncle always goes over and opens up the house and starts a fire, so it'll be warm when we get there. When we arrived that day, he said that he decided to clean out the flue, and good thing I did because it was full. Only had an opening of about an inch. That thing could have burned down the house, you know. To this day, we are convinced that our father was warning my sister about the chimney flue being blocked. It still gives me chill bumps when I think of the phone calls, but I kick myself for not taking screenshots of them. I do that automatically now for, well, so many things, but 20 years ago, not so much. If it had only been me, I know I would have thought that I must have dreamed it, because it just feels, well, really surreal, I guess. Almost like living in a time warp. I was 19 at the time, around 2009. I had a weekday off work. I decided to go to the beach by myself and brought my guitar along. This was rural Northern California, where the beaches are below cliff faces and usually empty of other people. Now, there was a particular beach where someone had built a driftwood hut into the side of a steep cliff, with the beach below about maybe 100 feet. You can just barely see the roof of the structure from the highway. I'd always wanted to check it out, so I parked my car on the highway and made my way along a narrow trail to the hut. It was a beautiful day, so I set up near one of the hut's windows and was playing my guitar and watching the waves. Suddenly, I hear someone else walking down the trail. I'm a little bit nervous, but figure that it must be well known to locals or something. But then enters the man. Immediately, I get a major creepy vibe from him. He's in his late 50s, overweight, unshaven, thick glasses, sloppy, dirty clothes, sweatpants and a dirty white shirt, but not homeless or anything. He immediately initiates conversation with me. First, just sort of nice pleasantries, talking about the view, the weather, but then he starts asking personal questions. Like, do you live around here? Do you go to college? Are you working today? Are you here with anyone? I answer very vaguely and am starting to get uncomfortable and feeling sort of trapped. The hut is very long and narrow, and there's no way for me to get to the trail leading back to the car without passing by him. At this point, I only say the bare minimum, trying to show him that I'm really not interested in conversation. I look away and he suddenly snaps a picture of me on his disposable camera. I ask him what he's doing, and he says that he wants to show his friends back home how beautiful the girls in California are. At this point, I start brainstorming my options. I could try to run past him, but I will have to get close. I can jump out the windows of the hut towards the ocean, but it's a pretty steep cliff face to the beach, 100 feet or so below. My gut started telling me that this was a dangerous situation, but I was frozen. I didn't know what to do. Then he tells me that he needs to go to his truck to get something about his camera, but I knew that he had already used his camera. He leaves the hut, but there's still no way for me to get to my car without passing him. I'm brainstorming what to do, but I kept thinking maybe I'm just overreacting. I quickly run to the entrance of the hut, but he's already making his way back down the trail towards me. And this is the gross part. He has a very large and very visible, well, you can probably guess, in his sweatpants, and he also has something under his arm. I quickly run to the opposite side of the hut and jump out the window, sitting on the ledge of the steep cliff. And in that split second, where I had to make a decision, I look in the sky and see two hawks fighting each other. I had just read The Alchemist, and if you remember, the universe sends the main characters omens and signs. One particular omen in the book is two fighting raptors, which ended up meaning something bad was coming and to run. I took that to heart for whatever reason, and in that moment, I knew that I had to scale the steep cliff to the beach below. I decided that I'd rather die falling or die swimming across the river. The beach below was also the estuary to a large river, than find out what that creep was planning. So I started scaling the steep cliff. He ran to the edge and asked where I was going. He yelled for me to come back. Adrenaline kicked in so hard that I made it down surprisingly fast without falling or even getting hurt. Luckily, he didn't follow. He stood there the entire time yelling for me to come back. I was visibly shaking when I got down to the bottom. I made it to the beach and hid in some vegetation for what felt like forever, but was probably only 20 minutes. I finally decided that it was safe to walk down to the beach where the actual trail was. I could see a man standing at the top, and it wasn't him. I could tell by the silhouette, but I was still terrified that he had an accomplice. I decided to risk it and run up and ask for help, and it, luckily, ended up being a park ranger. I quickly told him the whole story. We walked to the hut, and by this point, the creep was gone. He put out a radio call so enforcement would be on the watch out, and I filed a police report in the end. Then I left abruptly, and I left my purse and all my stuff in the hut. When I left abruptly, I left my purse and all my stuff in the hut. It was still all there when I returned with the ranger, but I was terrified that he went through my belongings and saw my address or my ID or whatever. For months afterward, too, I was honestly scared to be alone at home. Honestly, too, I genuinely think that the creep, he would have done something awful if I had stayed in that hut that day. I think he might have gone to his truck for a weapon or a rope or something, but I'm not sure since I couldn't see what he was tucking under his arm. At 19, I didn't know to trust my gut. These days, I know not to worry about what anyone thinks if I feel danger and the need to bolt. I'm not religious or anything too, but I thank the universe for sending me a very clear sign at such a pivotal moment. In the end as well, nothing ever came of the report, but sometimes I search for that town name in crimes in case I ever recognize his mugshot, because something tells me that this was not his first or last time trying something like this. Back when I was 5 or 6 years old, in the mid-80s, we lived in Rutland County, Vermont. There was a marshy area behind our house, separated by a small wooded area. I remember almost every night for about a couple of weeks waking up to strange lights in the wooded area behind the house. My room, it was on the second floor of the house, facing the rear towards the wooded area, and I could just see the edge of the marshy area through the trees during the day. My parents' room was directly across the hall, facing the front of the house. Now, I remember going into my parents' room and telling them about the lights, but my mum would always send me back to bed without checking. I got so scared that I'd hide under my bed when the lights were happening, and it was around this same time that I started seeing small, bipedal creatures that stood about 2.5 feet tall with large black eyes coming out of the woods and seemingly trying to get into the house. When I told my parents about them, they would say that they were just bad dreams and not to worry about it. Almost every night, though, after seeing the lights, they'd come out of the marshy area or wooded area, try to get into the house, and I'd hide under the bed, too scared to do anything else. Eventually, the lights stopped and they stopped coming out of the woods. My parents still think that I was just having reoccurring nightmares, but I can assure you that I was wide awake and I was not having bad dreams. So my uncle was put into an asylum last year because, well, he swore that he saw his brother, my father, in the kitchen of the house that we all share together. My uncle, myself, my mum, my little brother, and our cousin, my uncle's kid, all live in one house together because our family is kind of poor and we can only afford one house between the lot of us. My dad, He worked for the army, so he was deployed to different countries a lot. We hadn't seen him since just before Christmas, which we had to celebrate a little early that year due to my father's departure the day before Christmas. About a month had passed since my dad was deployed, before my uncle shouted his name happily from the kitchen. Me, my brother, and my cousin rushed into the kitchen to find my uncle stood there, alone and sort of confused. "Where is he?" my brother asked. "He was right here. He just... I swear he was," my uncle replied. Moments later, there was a loud knock at the door. My mother actually answered it, to find another soldier outside holding my father's uniform and tag necklace. My mother didn't cry, at least not then. Her wails echoed every hallway at nighttime, though. She just wanted to be brave in front of the kids, I guess, myself included. But my father was dead, so how could my uncle have seen him? Nobody spoke to my uncle for weeks after this. They thought that he saw the soldier coming down the pathway to our front door and made it all up as a sort of sick joke that he thought his brother might have found funny. My uncle, though, went crazy in the weeks that nobody spoke to him for. Absolutely insane. Like, he muttered to himself, he lashed out at everyone, he roamed the streets at night shouting and causing a fuss, telling random strangers what he saw was real. Nobody believed him, though. 2 police officers brought him home to us the night before we decided to put him into an asylum, for everybody's safety, him included. When we left the asylum, though, the following day, after leaving my uncle there, we arrived back home shortly after this, and I looked over at our kitchen window to find my father shaking his head at me. I instantly froze in my tracks, rubbed my eyes, but when I opened them again, he was gone. So, what the heck happened to me that day? Was my uncle telling the truth? I've never really told this story to anyone because, honestly, it still gives me the creeps many years later, and I'm afraid that people will think that I'm crazy for it. This happened back in 2018 to 2019 at my college apartment at the University of Northern Texas, UNT. This was student housing right outside of the IOOF cemetery, which is a couple of blocks long and many students will cut through to get to campus. I shared my apartment with my roommate, her name was M, on the top floor. When you walked in, there was the kitchen and then the living room further in. We each had our own bedroom, mine to the left and hers to the right of the main space. Our personal rooms had separate locks, because we were technically paying separately like 2 dorms. Her room touched our neighbors and the back wall had a sort of window facing our view of the pool and the cemetery. My room touched the outdoor hallway or breezeway and also had a window on the back wall facing the pool and the cemetery. Both rooms also had their own bathrooms and closets too. Also, we were not able to get into each other's personal bedrooms because they had separate keys from the main apartment key. Now, one of the first instances happened on a weekend for me. M usually went home and I sometimes stayed at the apartment to study, hang out, etc. This instance, I walked in and I noticed her light was on and heard movement all inside of her bedroom. I called out to say hey and told her that I was there, but there was no answer. I didn't think too much of it and continued doing my own thing. M later texted me asking if she had left her charger there, meaning that she wasn't there. I definitely freaked out at that and ended up getting someone from the apartments to come and check her room because at this point I suspected a break-in or something crazy. And well, in the end, no one ended up being in there, and I ended up going back home to my house early. This continued for weeks though, where I would see her lights turn on and off when she wasn't there, both during the day and the night. What was much worse though, started happening about halfway through our year there. Now, my bed faced away from my bathroom and towards the outer window in my room, and at night, I would start hearing my toilet flush, like multiple times a night. My dad and the apartment staff both ended up checking it, but nothing appeared to be physically wrong with the toilet itself. When this would happen, I started checking the time, and I noticed that it would always happen between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. in every instance. Shortly after the flushing started, Em and I both would hear knocking too. It always sounded like it came from the outer wall, overlooking the pool and the cemetery, rather than the inner wall against the hallway. It would always be 3 knocks too, again at night time as well. Em had brought up that she was hearing it, and that honestly made me more nervous because it meant that I wasn't just dreaming it up after being freaked out by everything else. To me, though, the scariest part happened right before we moved out for the school year. Thankfully, we only had a few weeks left at this point, but around that same window of time, I would hear a baby crying. At first, I would wake up and assume that, well, maybe it was like 10 p.m. and a neighbor would have brought her baby out to the pool or something to not wake up anyone inside. However, once I got brave enough to check everything out, I realized that it was much later than that, like 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. I asked Em if she heard it too, and she told me yes, but only once or twice at this point. So, one night we ended up staying awake until 3 in the morning to see if we could hear anything, and we heard the knocking, but no crying this time. However, the next day our AC went out. Not sure if that's related or not, but Em and I both heard the crying the next couple of nights after this. Em and I ended up doing some research about attachments and cleansing the apartment after this. We only had a couple of weeks left, but we honestly didn't want the next girls to have to experience this too. Em was a little more knowledgeable about all of this, and she did a sage cleanse and bought a crucifix for the door as well or whatever. And after these cleansings, the electrical issues, knocking, flushing, and crying, amazingly, they all stopped. We only had 2 weeks left at this point, so I'm hoping it truly was gone from the apartment for the next tenants. Ultimately, Em and I kind of drifted apart after graduation and COVID, but it was definitely a bonding experience when it happened. I'm hoping she's doing okay and free of any attachments like we experienced. I'm also sharing this here to see what you guys think it could have been, and also if we did anything right or wrong with the experience. I'm also curious if anyone knows anything about the cemetery and area in Texas, so please feel free to share if you do. I appreciate you guys listening, and I hope that maybe this story can potentially help someone else out there. The experience, it definitely still scares me to this day, so please be kind, even if you think that all of this is just baloney. This is one that still spooks me to this day, especially knowing my dad and just how unusual it is for him to believe anything spooky. Now, this was probably around 2006 to 2007. At the time, we were living in my hometown, a tiny rural town in a Virginia valley, surrounded by the Appalachian Mountains. My dad, he was the youth pastor at our small church, and we were living in the parsonage, which is a house owned by the church, which houses one of the pastors. It was in a rural area of the community, surrounded by farms and cornfields. It always creeped me and my 3 siblings out too. But there are so many other instances that I could share, which explains why all 4 of us now jokingly refer to that old house as haunted, even though we don't really believe in ghosts, but this one still lives in my mind. So one night, my dad was up late working on a sermon, sitting on the couch in the living room. My younger sister, about 6 at the time, walked out of the room, presumably sleepwalking, wearing a white t-shirt of my dad's. She walked into mine and my sister's room that we shared, and she just never really came back out. My dad got up to get her and bring her back to bed, and when he got to our room, he realized that somehow she wasn't in our room. He looked everywhere too, the kitchen, the laundry room, etc., trying to figure out where she went. Eventually, he went into her room she shared with our younger sibling, and there she was, still asleep in her bed, wearing purple pajamas. My dad has 2 masters in theology and is still a pastor to this day, and he has no explanation for what he witnessed that night, and it really weirded him out. The only reason I know about this story is someone at our church told me the story one time. I asked him about it, and he confirmed that it was true, and that he never wanted to tell us because he didn't want to scare us, and he knew how scared we were in that house already. It's definitely one of the weirdest things that we've encountered, and honestly, I hope to never hear something like it ever again. This happened to me recently, and I am genuinely creeped out. I'm a woman, and I was trying to get rid of my ex's stuff. Everyone told me to do Facebook Marketplace, so I did. I listed a lamp for $5, I just wanted it gone, and this guy contacted me asking for it, then told me that he was going to come and get it, but he's driving from an area about 30 minutes away. I made a mistake. I put the lamp right outside of my door because I'm a coward and I lied about an emergency that I had to leave for, but I think that my lie just saved me from something really bad. You see, I have a door camera, and I watched as 3 full-grown men walk up to the lamp, stand there for a few minutes, and then walk off. On the video, they were talking and sounded sort of upset that they came all this way for nothing. They left, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe they really did just want the lamp. But still, why travel so far for a lamp, right? And why bring 2 friends? Also, I just rewatched the cameras and they looked under my doormat and took a picture of my door as well. I'm not going to ever let anyone come to my door like that again, and I feel really dumb about it. But what's done is done, and I guess the lesson is learned. I'm just wondering if there's anything that I can do about this. Should I prepare for them to come back at some point? And if so, well, what should I do? When I was around 9 years old, my father was fixing up our house with 2 rooms on the left, a hallway in the middle, and another room and a bathroom on the right. And one night, he took off all the doors, leaving just curtains in their place. While I watched TV in their room, I heard my dad from the living room asking me where I was, claiming that he saw a dark shape of a kid run from my room to theirs, right to left, and that he saw the movement on the curtains as well. He brushed it off, thinking that it was just the wind or our imagination. But later, my sister, 8 at the time, said that she saw a snake-like shadow outside of her window. I asked her for more details, and she said that it was something big, not a snake, but it moved like one. I thought that she was making it up, and then we went to bed. But after like 5 minutes of turning the lights off, my sister screamed and started crying. I could hear my parents asking her from their room what's wrong, but she wasn't answering. So my dad asked me to go and check. I guess he was scared or whatever. So I go from my room all scared and picked her up on my arms and take her to mine. The next morning, my mum asked her what happened, and she said that she was awake, looking at the ceiling, and then she realized there was a figure, like a weird shape there. When she finally was about to see what it was, she said that it was seemingly a kid with sharp teeth and horns, and the kid jumped on her. A lot of things like this kept happening to her until she was, I don't know, maybe 16 or so, where she would see things right after someone else saw a shape or whatever. And then all of a sudden, after 16 years old, everything just sort of stopped. It was a weird night, that one, and I'll never forget her screams and just how honestly scared she seemed. This was about a year ago now, and I still think about it a lot. So I was laying in bed next to my partner, We had both fell asleep around 10 or 11 that night, which was kind of out of the ordinary for us because we're normally night owls. I want to preface this too by saying that neither of us do any sort of drugs, drink, and have both not really even smoked weed since like November of 2022. In other words, it had been at least a month or two at this point that neither of us had smoked. Now, have you ever had one of those dreams like inside of a dream? Well, this was one of those. I didn't think that I was sleeping, but I certainly was. I turn over and check my phone. It's around 2 a.m. and everything seems real normal, but then the door opens and it has to have opened only enough for a person to slip in and out. I open my eyes in the dream and I see what appears to be a man that's around 8 or 9 feet tall, standing at the foot of my bed. He leans over my partner and stares at him dead in the face, but while standing there, just slowly gets closer and closer, and gets so close that it's like he was about to kiss him. The odd part is that he's still at the edge of the bed and his body is leaned over the bed. We have a queen-size bed and it's raised. Humanly, this wouldn't have been possible is what I'm getting at. I try to move, but it feels like these bricks are on my chest and I'm just completely stuck. My partner, on the other hand, I'm hearing him make uncomfortable sounds in his sleep, like something is wrong, but I can't wake him up. I began using the only bit of strength that I had left in my body to tap my boyfriend with my hand. We're laying backs flat side by side and I'm on the edge. I finally am able to pull myself out of it. I wake up as he stands straight up and moves toward my side of the bed, my eyes now open. He sees me and he looks as if he's moving from the end of the bed to the side of the bed where I'm at. Then I raise my body up and it's weird. It was kind of like I scared him if I was to put words to it. But he slowly walks to the center of the room. He's facing away from me now. And then this figure in less than 2 seconds just vanished into thin air. Our room door is always shut at night, and obviously at this point I'm not going back to sleep, so I get up to go and check the door, and it was actually cracked open. I check my phone and it's 2:32 in the morning. So how long did this go on for, I wonder? And based on the door, was it real? How did this happen, too? I'm a witch and I thought that I was protected, but the truth seems to be that no one is safe from, well, what others describe as the Hat Man. Before I begin this, just to be clear, I've never actually met this person. So this all started about 5 months ago, and it was quite a pleasant interaction, I guess, but it has slowly gotten worse and, well, just really creepy, I guess. Around November or October, I noticed that my wing mirror on my car had been put inwards. I park about a street away from my house, so I have a short walk to my house. My house is on a main road with one drive and my parents park in the drive. I asked my mother if this was her, as it was a thoughtful thing to do. She maintains that it wasn't her, and my father also said that it wasn't him. So I thought it was a kind soul or just a thoughtful person. After all, where I park, it has a lot of older people, and they always say good morning to me when I set off to work. This continues for months onwards. It's only recently stopped since parking away from that side of the street. But I asked a couple of older people on that street, and they said that it wasn't them either. At this point, I only wanted to say thank you, but I continued going to work and didn't really notice anything else until, well, the winter weather got worse. And in December of 2023 was when the weirdness continued. The frost kicked in and the snow started on occasion. Since I set off from work at about 7 a.m, it can be pretty frosty at that time, and I would need to sort of de-ice my car a lot. And about mid-December, I guess, I remember running late for work. It was around 7:15 in the morning, and I still had not de-iced my car, so I was doing a careful rush to my car as it was pretty cold and icy. only to get there and see that it had been de-iced for me. I was confused, a little bit happy, but also a bit shaken, I guess. It was a strange feeling, I suppose. Again, I asked my parents and anyone that I saw on the street if they had done it, but it wasn't any of them. My mum laughed and said, you might have a secret admirer. And honestly, it was like she was a fortune teller. The de-icing of my car happened a few times more on very icy days, and from January onwards is when it got strange to the point that I started parking elsewhere. About the end of January, start of February 2024, I saw what I can only describe as homemade food left on the top of my car. And no, don't worry, I didn't eat anything. I ended up throwing these away once I got to work, but I found this situation was getting beyond strange at this point. It was around this time, too, that the first letter or note was left. It was written in what I can only describe as doctor's handwriting. It was basically asking if I enjoyed being treated like, and I quote, the princess I deserve to be treated like. I brought this home, showed my parents, and they didn't like this at all. My dad said that he was going to start parking on the street and I can park on the drive for a while. I said that that would be a good idea. However, if this person was looking for my car, he would know which house was mine. My dad agreed, but also pointed out that he or she may have already been watching me and may actually already know where I live. He stated that the main thing was that me walking home from my car to the house at 8:15 p.m. I work 12-hour shifts. He said that this could be risky. He also stated that he would sort the situation out if anything happened. I questioned possibly going to the police, but my dad stated that they would just laugh at us without any proof. I knew that he was right too, so in the end we didn't really have anything. I didn't like the idea of parking back on the street, so I didn't. It's now April and I stopped parking on the drive a few weeks ago, and now I've started parking on a different street still close to my house. Nothing has happened since February, and I really hope that it doesn't, as it's starting to get worse and to escalate. So my question for all of you guys is, do I have a stalker? Or is someone just trying to mess with me? How do I catch this person in the act so I can figure out who they are? I'll try and answer whatever questions you guys have when I can, but if you guys could help me out, then that would be amazing. To start this off, I live in southern Minnesota, in basically the middle of nowhere. For privacy's purposes, I'll be using fake names, and it was around 9 p.m. when this took place. So, I was with my friends Ali and Ella. We were driving around in my golf cart and went to a spot where I would normally hike. It was sort of a large valley, I guess. Not sure how else to describe it, but it was an abandoned construction zone that was never finished. We were exploring in the open, just looking for cool rocks to take home. There was some sort of a bird that kept following us. Every time we would approach it, it would go fly away, but the second that we would keep going, it appeared again. It just wouldn't leave us be, but we didn't think too much of it. It sounded almost like it was making warning calls, perhaps, but Ella thought that she had heard a man's voice but brushed it off. This is actually pretty important to what happened next, but we decided to head to the other part of the valley, which was close to a nearby river. It was basically a clearing surrounded by trees with a big mound of dirt and rubble in the middle. We stopped because I had said that there were always some cool stuff to find there. So I parked the golf cart, and right as we were about to get off, I get this overwhelming feeling of danger and feeling of doom. It felt like my stomach had dropped to the floor. Then Ella points at the top of the mound, and on the top was some sort of creature just standing there. It was tall and skinny, short hair, coyote-looking ears, short neck, and abnormally long body. It was too small to be a deer, but way too big to be a coyote. It stood there too, just sort of staring at us. It didn't move, and I froze completely, unaware of my friend screaming at me to drive away. We all had a very strong feeling of danger and fear, and we just had instant bad vibes that something was wrong. Eventually, though, I caught myself and I quickly hightailed it out of there, and when we were driving away, it just sort of stood there, slowly turning its neck as we drove past. I would like to stress too that whatever this was, it was not a deer. I got a pretty good look at it, and it wasn't anything that I'd ever seen before, in fact. We are speculating that the bird was a warning sign and we saw something that we really weren't supposed to see. We're pretty much in shock and we have no idea what to do about any of this, so if you have any ideas as to what we should do, then please do help us. I'm sort of losing my mind over this, and I just don't know what to think and don't know what to do. I live in a house which dates back to the late 1800s. Tons of history, and I looked into previous owners and know that they had children, most of whom sadly didn't survive very long. I've not had any experiences so far. I've lived here since October, but I do sometimes feel like I'm being watched. It's never felt malicious, I guess, but still a bit weird. However, today, I have a speaker plugged into my TV, which only ever activates usually when the TV is on. But when the TV was off, the speaker turned on alone. I really don't know how that's possible, because it can literally only turn on with power from the TV. It's a soundbar. Also, I was upstairs for hours organizing and tidying a room that I'd neglected, and I came back down to put something in the living room to find my salt lamp turned on. This is a lamp which only can be turned on by a remote, which is on the TV stand, and which definitely was not accidentally pressed or anything. It's also probably worth noting too that while I was sorting out stuff, my dog was sitting with his back to me facing open doors, almost as if he was watching out for something. I have no doubt that if there is something here that it's friendly. I have zero bad vibes, I guess you could say, but still, it is just a teeny bit unsettling. Also kind of fascinating, I guess, but I'd love to know your thoughts or possible debunks. I'm not one of these people who are dead set, pardon the pun, on everything being paranormal. So if you have any explanation as to how lights and speakers can turn on their own like that, then genuinely I would love to hear it. But if you do think that it is paranormal, I would also love to hear your thoughts and how to keep this whole thing friendly. My older brother recently moved into a house with his pregnant wife. This was last summer. My younger brother, he's not younger than me, just younger than my other brother, and Dad moved in October, and me and my mum, we moved in December. The house was made around the 1930s, and during these months, we encountered nothing out of the ordinary, except for when me and my mum moved in, I guess. The baby was safely born in November. During the summer to October, it was just my brother and his wife, nothing weird. The house has 2 floors plus a basement and a driveway in the back. Now, in December, my sister-in-law's phone wallpaper changed to Tom from Tom and Jerry, smoking a fat cigar. She left the phone on her bed on the 2nd floor, left for like 3 minutes and then came back, and it was changed. It was nothing too weird, I guess, because we thought that it was just a glitch, but then in mid-January, when my older brother and his friend were in the basement, there were 3 knocks on the basement back door, which leads to the driveway. There was also some movement outside, which my brother saw through the glass window. When I heard this, I thought that it must have just been the wind, but my older brother was really shook by this, which was weird for him. He was adamant that it was definitely a person or a figure at least. Then a few days ago, while I was passing my younger brother's room, I swore that I saw 2 feet on the bed, I thought that it was just my brother in his room, but when I went downstairs, as soon as I went, my brother came into the house through the front door. I asked him, "Hey, weren't you just upstairs?" And he said no to this. "Maybe it was a ghost, haha," he said. I was so sure, though, that I saw 2 feet that I actually thought that he was in his room, so I went back upstairs, retraced my steps, and there was nothing there. My eyesight isn't the best, I guess, but I don't know, it seemed real. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, I don't know. I also watch a lot of scary movies, and I guess that adds more to the fear, but yesterday we were wondering about how the phone wallpaper changed like it did, and we all agreed that no one did it, so we're all pretty serious people, and I don't actually think anyone would lie about it. My older brother said that maybe they changed it to Tom smoking a cigar because my dad smokes cigarettes in the back of the house. Not fat ones or cigars or anything, just regular ones. I guess it makes sense, but it just seems kind of dumb to me, I suppose. Is this thing toying with us? Is there even a thing that exists here? We still haven't told my younger brother about any of this because he's going to stay in the basement after the renovations are done. And all of this started when the basement renovations began. My younger brother doesn't want to even go to the first floor if there's no one in it, because he's actually pretty scared of it. But I don't know, what do you guys think? Is there something in my house, and if there is, can I do anything about it? So some years back, we bought a piece of property. I was walking around it, and a van was parked in the back of the woods somewhere. I called in the number on the van, and the wife of the owner called the police, and after a day of, well, BS really, they found him hanging in a tree on the back corner of the property, unfortunately. He died in the place that he loved the most, his wife said. Anyway, fast forward to one morning as the sun was coming up, and I heard footsteps running down the hall to the side of my bed. I have 2 boys, so this wasn't really alarming at all at the moment, but I was actually in the house by myself that day. I opened my eyes, and there was a blonde-haired boy in blue jean overalls standing next to my bed. I have blonde-haired children too, but I suddenly realized that this was not my kid, and all of a sudden the boy started to vanish from the head down, and soon was just gone. I slept with my pistol next to me for 2 nights after that, as if that would have done any good, but it was comforting, I guess. I rented the house out for years too, and I came back to live there, so I needed to change my address. I went to the local post office, and I was talking to the clerk, and she knew the address. She then said, "My dad actually ended himself on that property, you know." We talked a little bit, and I asked her about it. What was your dad like as a boy? What did he wear and look like as a kid? And my jaw dropped when she said blue jean overalls, and he had blonde hair. We talked about what I had seen, and she wasn't surprised at all, and that was honestly surprising to me, because apparently she had experienced things as well with her deceased dad. I never told my kids about this experience, but after finding out who the ghost was, I guess I wasn't really afraid of another encounter if it did happen. There were some noises and doors that were opened when I walked by that were closed the next time that I saw them. And you can say what you want, but I think that he came back as a boy that used to enjoy the land my house is on. He seems to be gone now, at least, because I've never seen or heard anything out of the ordinary in years now. But really, who knows? Maybe tonight or tomorrow or some other time, I'll experience something again. So, I was at a friend's house a little while ago now. You couldn't really call it a party, I guess, but there were a few people there and it was a sort of social setting. A gathering may be a better term, I suppose, but I'm really not good at these things and never really have been. The effort that I have to go to maintain my social graces is quite exhausting for me. The majority of time I just sort of tend to avoid them, I guess, but I would have been around 19 at this time. There were around 8, maybe 9 people there, and it was a mixture of men and women. I guess we've all been to them at one point or another, right? One of the women that was there was kind of new agey, believed in the goddess, crystal healing, all that stuff. Which I'm not rubbishing, but in the 90s, to some, this was definitely a fad. So as the night wound on, she suggested that we did a Ouija board session. Now, I may or may not have mentioned this before, but I'm third generation Romanian, and I was brought up in a family that respected the old ways. So if you know, then you kind of know what I'm talking about with that. And in this kind of situation, I'm heading for the door pretty quickly. My friend whose party it was stopped me though, and kind of placated me, told me that I was just being silly and he actually did rubbish what the woman believed in, and said that it was a joke. So in the end I stayed. But that, as it turned out, was a huge mistake. All around in a lot of respects in the end actually. So, I was sat at a distance from the table where they convened. She was sat with the planchette asking if there was anyone there. People were smirking and generally just sort of disrespecting the entire thing. She kept asking for signs or if anyone was there, and that's when I started feeling uncomfortable. You ever get that gut feeling that you're just being watched or followed? It was sort of like that, like an itch behind your ear. Your scalp tingles and you get a feeling like you need to be moving. It's an instinct bred and hardwired into you over thousands of years and generations. And then the planchette starts moving, and she's smiling and all happy that it works, and she obviously doesn't look like a clown. So then they start asking simple questions. Will I be rich? Will I be famous? Answers are all no, nothing unexpected. Until a guy asks if he'll be married, then it spells out never. So he asks why, and it spells out die young. All of a sudden, things take a turn as well. And at that, I tell her to put it down and send it back. She obviously didn't understand what I was telling her to do, and the thing is spelling car accident. He laughs it all off and goes and stands in the kitchen, and in the meantime, one of the women asks if she'll have kids. It spells out never. Now my instinct is telling me to leave, and I'm listening to it. I go and grab my coat, and as I'm leaving, the woman doing the board calls out, "Your granddad has a message for you." I stopped, walked back in, and calmly said to her, "You have no idea what you're doing. You're a child with a box of matches, and whatever is talking to you is not my granddad." I smashed the board off the table and stormed out at that. And in the years that passed, that guy was actually killed in a car accident with 3 other people. He was 23. The woman never did have children, and some of the other things, mainly the malicious stuff, did come to pass. I don't know what it was that stupid woman called in that flat that night, but what I will say is this: do not play with things that call out to the dead, and if you do, make sure that what you call was human ones, because you never can be too careful. That message from my granddad, I never did hear it, and the woman that did the board, I never did see her again. When I was a child, I lived in a very distressing environment. My father, although not violent, was extremely manipulative and verbally abusive to me and my mother. My mum did the best that she possibly could of shielding me from the damage that he did to those around him, but still, it left me with terrible anxiety and depression from a young age. Now, I remember multiple instances where I hallucinated distressing things, but none of them were truly unexplainable, I guess. When I was 4, my doctor prescribed me a high dose of prescription-strength Benadryl that is not suitable for children. I theorize it is because of this that the first night I took them, I hallucinated a writhing, slithering carpet of spiders covering the floor. Needless to say, my mum never took me back to that doctor and began taking me to actual specialized pediatricians. Later in my life, at the age of 10, I experienced sleep paralysis too. I don't remember much of it, but I remember seeing shadow people staring at me from the darkest parts of my room. Despite these encounters, only one is truly unexplainable to me. No medication, no sleep paralysis, nothing. So one night when I was 6 years old, I couldn't sleep. This was pretty normal for me, but this time I felt as if I was being watched. At some point, maybe an hour or so into the night, I got thirsty. I still felt as if I was being watched, but at the time I did not think these fears were rational, as my anxiety often mimicked this feeling. I walked into the hallway and immediately felt an immense drop in temperature. This wasn't completely unusual though, as my room was far better insulated than the rest of the house. I continued making my way to the kitchen to get a glass of water, but stopped as soon as I saw it. Now, the living room was directly next to the kitchen, and they were separated by one thin wall, so you could see the kitchen and living room from the hallway. And in the middle of the room, standing in the center of the room, was a massive humanoid shadow creature. It was extremely skinny and roughly 9 feet tall. It had to bend over to fit under the ceiling. It had a face that was constantly smiling. In fact, the face was the only part of it that wasn't completely pitch black. It stared at me too, smiling as I stood there completely unable to fathom what I was looking at. And then it waved. That's when my survival instincts finally kicked in. I spun around and ran as fast as I could back to my bedroom. I couldn't hear it move, but I could feel it getting closer to me. I slammed my door shut as I got to my bedroom and immediately slid under my bed. I watched the crack under the door from under my bed, unmoving. I watched as its feet stood at the door before it slid under the door. It was as if it lost all shape and became a sort of two-dimensional puddle of just pure darkness. This formless puddle approached my bed before the creature went back to what it was before and stood in front of my bed. It then reached its hand under the bed and wrapped its fingers under the foot of the bed, and I could only watch in horror as its eyes and smiling mouth poked out under the bed. I screamed as loud as I possibly could, and as I did this, a few seconds later, my mum came bolting into the room. As she opened the door, the creature literally just vanished right before my eyes. I cannot explain what I saw that day, nor can I ask anybody to believe it, but I wanted to put it out there somewhere, and I figured that this would be a good place to tell it. Also, something that I do remember is that after I got out from underneath the bed had clearly moved from its original spot. I jogged to my local village play area to do some pull-ups because I hadn't done any exercise today and wanted to go at night when it would be empty, or so I thought. It's nighttime and freezing and dark, so the village is totally dead and quiet. The park is one of the few places that has a streetlight nearby, which is why I go there. When I got there, I could see outside the park 2 figures, illuminated, sort of standing by the bench, completely motionless. I thought that they were maybe dog walkers or something. I couldn't see a dog though. I did my pull-ups quickly, and when I looked at them again, they were both still there and still completely motionless. No reaction to me or anything, it seemed. In fact, they were so still it was weird. When I looked closer at them, I could tell one was a man in grey and the other a woman in pink. I could see the details of their clothes, but the weird part was their faces. They had no features. Totally smooth skin like Slender Man or something. My eyesight is pretty good, and I thought that if I could make out their buttons on their coats, I should be able to see their eyes or noses or something, but they just looked like a skin-colored circle. Again, too, they were just standing there like statues while I looked at them. I felt like they could see me too, so I didn't do another set of pull-ups and I began to run quickly away back home. I looked back a couple of times and when I did, I could see that they had moved and they seemed to be heading in my direction. But the weird thing was that whenever I looked back, they were still as a statue again. I went the long way home after that, trying to avoid them by going through back roads to lose them and whatnot. I eventually got home and that was that. I don't know what to think about all of this though. Was it just mind tricks? Ghosts? Demons? I've come at night before and it's always been empty, but it just felt off today and then I saw whatever that was. What do you think? This story comes from Belgium and took place in 2020 during COVID confinements. I was 20 back then, and at that time, because of the severity of the pandemic in Belgium, the law stated that you could only go out to practice sports or to work, so I took the habit of meeting with a friend, Sully, to go out for runs and to practice all kinds of sports in general. Both of us were quite fond of urban exploration and knew a spot in the outskirts of Brussels consisting of an old sports and wellness centre where we took the habit to hang out after our runs at. To get into this spot, you have to go through a hole in a fence on a street, cross a small portion of woods, and you'll come up on a football pitch and tennis court, and up on a hill is the centre, which is an old 4-story building. The whole centre takes a whole street block pretty much. On that day, we had just finished a 5-kilometre run and went out to our spot as usual. We were walking to the building since it was about to rain when we saw 2 teenagers sitting on the roof edge, and I remember thinking that it bothered me since we were planning to go to the roof as well. So we went to the hall area instead to wait for a bit, in hopes that those guys would leave. In the hall area, you sort of have a clear view into the kitchen, which you have to go through if you want to go to the roof. You can also see into another smaller hall and into the dining room as well. Sully was rolling himself a cigarette whilst I was sort of gathering 2 chairs and an office table for us to sit at. And this next part, it honestly gives me chills when I think about it. So as I finished setting everything up, I remember starting to feel a little unwell for some reason. Like I was being watched or something, and not in a good way. That's when I looked at the kitchen and saw, for a brief moment, a head sticking out of the doorframe and staring right at us. It was a man. I couldn't say what age he was since he was all dirty, but the one thing that I remember is that he had a really exaggerated happy expression on his face, like he had just found exactly what he was looking for. At that moment, I just froze and was unable to react bravely to the situation. I sort of leaned slowly towards Sully, all whilst keeping eye contact with the man, and told him very calmly that we had to go immediately. I tend to make lots of jokes to all of my friends, and especially to Sully, but when he saw the look that I had on my face when I told him that we had to leave, he didn't say a word, just took his backpack and stood up. We ran to the football pitch and saw that the 2 teenagers, they were still on the roof, so we started to yell at them asking if the man was with them or if they saw him, but they answered that no, they hadn't seen anyone and they had come by themselves, so if someone was there, he wasn't with them. We told them that it was probably better for them to leave as well, since we didn't know what the man in the lobby was up to. They told us that they would be fine and that they would leave a bit after. We decided to leave since we already told them what we saw, and we also had been out pretty long at this point. It wasn't actually legal with confinement rules for us to be out this long as well. And as we were walking towards the woods, I turned back and I swear that I saw a silhouette standing in front of the staircase leading to the roof, but my mind didn't quite react and I just left alongside with my friend. I guess I was so shocked because nothing like this had ever happened to me before that I just decided not to talk about it to anyone in fear of them not believing me or possibly making fun of me, I guess. My friend Sully is the only one who was with me that day, and he didn't take a look at that man, but he is pretty much as scared as I was, just by seeing my own reaction at that time. I don't know what happened to those teenagers, but I did eventually find local articles and papers dating from that time about teenagers being chased by a crazy man in an abandoned building, but the information given wasn't enough for me to be sure that it was the same people and even the same story. All I know is what I saw, and to be honest, I'm grateful that I did see it, because if I hadn't, I shudder to think what may have happened. So when I was 10 to 12, 1992 to 94, myself along with my brother, mother and aunt all moved into a nice house on the south side of St. Louis. It was your basic layout with houses 20 feet apart and built in the 40s and 50s. It was a nice 4-bedroom, and I remember my mum saying how cheap it was. Immediately though, after moving in, all this weird stuff started happening. Everything from doors slamming, footsteps upstairs when nobody was up there, the TV would change channels by itself, etc. It was annoying stuff, but nothing my 10-year-old self couldn't get used to. After a few months, we also noticed things were getting a bit weirder. The sinks in the basement used to spew black goo out of the drains, and the same goo would run down the walls through the house. What made it worse was that it sort of smelled like sulfur. The basement was a scary place too. I never felt right being down there. But my brother, who was 2 years older than I was, begged me to sleep in his room with him down there because he would say something would keep waking him up at around like 3:04 in the morning every night. And allegedly it was really scaring him. Now, my brother normally wanted nothing to do with me. We were always fighting and making fun of each other, so for him to ask this was a pretty big deal in my mind. I remember one night we sat up all night waiting for 3:04 and nothing happened. Maybe I don't remember, or because we were awake it just didn't show itself. In any case, in the backyard I remember the soil looked silver almost. I still have no idea why or how it was this color, but my brother used to say that it was ground up tombstones. So many different crazy things happened in this house, and I could go on forever about it, but eventually one day I was walking home from school, and when I got there, my mum was sitting outside in the car with all of our belongings in trash bags. She said to me to get into the car and that we were moving right now. Whatever happened to her, she never really said, but over the years she had told me things like her and my aunt covered the upstairs with flour once and immediately saw bare footprints. The remote control came up off the table once into the air and was thrown at her, and even hit her in the face. My bed once flung across my room, and my toys were always all over the upstairs when I wouldn't be home, and I would have to explain to her that I always put them back before I left, so I didn't throw them around. After we moved out and moved in with my grandma, I never experienced anything since then. A few years ago, though, I was up in the city around my old neighborhood and drove down the street, and to my surprise, the house was gone. Like, there was a large concrete slab there where the house used to be. Now, this was a city street, so the missing out was pretty obvious, but even Google Maps shows an empty lot with the address number still attached to it. I often wonder what actually happened to it. I personally think it was like the end of Poltergeist and it was sucked into another dimension or something, maybe. Well, that's what I like to think anyway. I wish I had the resources to look into what happened, but I've never been able to find any public records or anything of the demolition. Most people just think that I'm crazy when I tell them about this, but I know that it wasn't just my childhood imagination, especially because everyone in the house also witnessed all of the same experiences. I live in a college town with 6 other young girls in our 20s. The city that we live in It's not that nice and has a huge homeless and drug problem where break-ins are not unusual. However, what happened last Saturday was definitely strange. My roommates and I, as well as some of our boyfriends, were hanging out and drinking in our house, while two of the girls opted to go out to a bar. By around 1 a.m, the two girls came home from the bar and everyone was tired, so we all went to our respective rooms to go to sleep. Later in the night, I was awoken by someone opening my door and standing in my room staring at me. In my head, I thought that it was one of my roommate's boyfriends, trying to see if my boyfriend and I were still awake to continue to party. Since I was tired, I pretended to be asleep to avoid being bugged. After a bit, the person closes my door and proceeds to pace back and forth in the hallway. They then begin to attempt to open my roommate's door, whose room is right next to mine. Luckily, her door was locked and she also had her boyfriend with her. The person then proceeds to go into our utensils drawer and grabs a knife to attempt to pick her lock. After gaining some courage, her boyfriend shouts, "Who is that?" which startles the man, who then sprints up the stairs and out the door. The police were called and did a search and obviously didn't find anything. They told us break-ins were normal, which we knew. However, what makes this whole scenario creepier is that he didn't steal anything. My phone, alcohol, and $600 shoes were just left there, untouched. We also suspect that this person was not on drugs or alcohol, as he moved very quietly and very deliberately. He was able to get in because the two girls who came home from the bar did not lock the door behind them, apparently. I'm not sure what this man's intent really was, but I am forever grateful that I happened to have my boyfriend with me that night, which is not that often as he lives 3 hours away and pretended to be asleep. It gives me chills thinking that a strange man was in my room, and what could have happened to me if I was alone. When I was 7 years old, my parents and I were living in a basement apartment in the Bronx. The way the apartment was set up had my mother and father's room at one end of a short hall, the bathroom in the middle, and my room at the other end. If you don't know anything about a basement apartment, just know that it doesn't take much effort to enter one through a window. Now, one very early morning, possibly around 7 or 8, I was woken up by a very sharp, pain on my butt cheek. I got up thinking our cat had gotten in my room and had bit me or something, as she used to nip hard and attack at whatever she felt like, toes included. So I jumped up looking for her, only to see a grown man sitting on my bed. I remember being upset and asking him why he pinched me, to which he hushed me and said something about him being thirsty. I remember pulling down my nightgown to cover my butt at that point and asking him if he wanted a juice or a water. I wasn't scared at all, more surprised and mad that this man had pinched my butt so hard. He said that he wanted juice, so I left my room and closed my door with him still sitting on my bed. I walked to the kitchen and got him some juice. As I was bringing the cup back to my room, I looked at my parents' door and thought that I should probably wake them up, but can't remember why I decided against it. And I ended up giving the man the cup, and he drank the juice. I remember he asked me if I could help him find his friend, and him telling me that he was lost. I remember that my dad had told me that I wasn't allowed to go outside without him or my mother, but they were worried as this was a new neighborhood. We had only moved in maybe 2 weeks earlier. I remember being scared to go outside because I didn't want my parents to be upset with me, so I told him that I had to wake up my parents to ask. I remember that he said that it would be real quick because he knew that his friend was somewhere in the area and we would find him quickly. I once again said no and told him that I was not allowed to go outside without my parents. So he ended up saying that he didn't need my help anymore and that he would find them. He asked me to lock the door behind him, so I walked him out and locked the door, waving him goodbye. I tried to go back to sleep, but it was too late. I was awake at this point, so I started watching cartoons. Well, the volume happened to be way louder than expected because my mother woke up and asked me very angrily why I was awake so early. I told her all about the man pinching my butt really hard, to which at first she didn't believe me as she thought that I had a bad dream. But she lifted my nightgown and I guess I must have had a bruise or something. I will never forget how she got so calm and she started smiling at me and with a very sweet voice started asking me what did he look like, what happened, and if I remember what he was wearing. I told her, to which she left my room for a moment, coming back with my dad. She then told me to tell him everything using that same sweet voice, and I did. I didn't think that I was in trouble or anything, and I thought that I had made a new friend. After telling them about my new friend, they got dressed and started searching. And well, it didn't take long because he happened to be the Super's family member. When I saw him, I immediately shouted at him, "Hey, friend." My parents told him to go inside, which I did. Maybe an hour or so later, my parents came back with McDonald's for me, but they seemed really angry. Before the end of that day, my father put a padlock on my door and told me that whenever I go to sleep, to always lock my door as our kitchen windows didn't lock, because apparently that's how he got in. Sometime later, I was 15, I found out that the guy was mentally ill and was sent away from the Dominican Republic by his family so he wouldn't get arrested for something he did out there with another little girl. And yeah, that's about it. It all surprises me that I wasn't scared to this day. But please, if you or anyone you know lives in a basement, ground level apartment, or flat, please triple check that all the window locks work, and always lock your windows up. I moved to a rural area of the North Georgia-Alabama mountains. Sand Mountain was the name of the place, and it was connected to Dade County GAR, but right over the state line in Higdon, Alabama. I was around 8 years old, I think. So, when I first got there, it was a total culture shock, having moved from a large urban area in the southwest. I vividly remember driving through a virtual sea of green right outside of Atlanta. The novelty of the trees soon wore off, and I dove back into a book to stave off the boredom of a long drive to my new home. And at some point, I started to feel really uneasy, so I told my mum. She wrote it off as a symptom of the major life change or something to that effect. I did my best to just accept it as nothing more than that, but the anxiety and the sense of oppression got a lot worse. It seemed that the heavy feeling directly correlated to the proximity to my new home. That was a feeling that I would live with for over a decade as well. I would soon find out that it was nothing in relation to what I would soon experience as well. I cannot say how long it was until it started, but it had to be a few months after we moved into a little trailer at the end of a long driveway in the clearing of the woods. Our closest neighbor was well over a mile away. My room was on the opposite end of the trailer as my mother and her husband's room. I also had a huge bay window, which will be important in a minute. So, it all started kind of odd one night. I couldn't sleep despite being tired from exploring the acres of woods that I now resided in. So I'm lying there, Cartoon Network in the dark, trying to fall asleep, when very suddenly I'm deep in the woods in the southeast of the property. It was a place that I'd been before, but not really much, although I did recognize it, I suppose. It was the strangest feeling, like being a passenger in another's mind, seeing through their eyes but having no control, just sort of going along for the ride, I guess. It was disorienting, to say the least. It exponentially worsened when whatever it was started to move as well. It was an unnatural speed, predatory and precise, kind of reminiscent of the way an animal would stalk its prey, darting from cover to cover, tree to tree. It was a blur until it stopped again, just giving me the time that I needed to regain my bearings, as much as I was able anyway. This only lasted for a few seconds, and I then seemed to snap back into my body again, laying in bed. It was such a strange feeling, and I didn't want to even think about it, because I guess I just didn't want it to be real. But the next night it happened again, and the next after that. After a few days, I realized that each time it was a bit longer, and it definitely seemed to be allowing me to see through it for longer each night. I can't say how long it lasted, but it was long enough to be a commonplace event every night, and enough for me to think that I was perhaps going crazy. One night, though, I was coming up to the clearing that trailer was in, and as I realized this, my consciousness was in this thing's mind to some degree, and an all-consuming sense of dread started to rise up in me, I guess, worsening with every brief pace behind cover. Note, too, is that, thinking back on this thing just didn't seem to operate in any sense of time and space that we are accustomed to, because it would pick up every night in the same place that I'd left its mind or whatever. But I don't think it was just frozen there till the next day, right? I think it was playing some sort of game or something. Kind of like when an orca plays with a seal or a cat with a mouse, I guess. But in any case, as my terror reached a crescendo, I was suddenly ejected back to myself. I don't know if I did it or it, but it killed whatever link that it made or had with me. But it was different this time. I sat straight up and turned toward the window instantly, because I just knew that it was there, that it was a few feet outside of the tree line. As much as I didn't want to see anything, I still gathered myself up and looked out the bay window at the tree line. And I will never forget it as long as I live, because it was there, leaning from behind a large tree right at the edge of the woods. It was tall, like really tall, and its skin was taut, like it was stretched over its bones, but I don't really remember any detail of its skeletal anatomy or anything. All its features were grotesquely elongated, like they were stretched out purposely. It had long claw-like fingers that curled sort of around into the common sign that you would use to beckon someone closer to you. Its face was large and humanoid, but with that same stretched-out look. It also had a smile that was impossibly wide, and large, long, sharp teeth sort of skinny and needle-like, and its eyes were really big, even with it being the size that it was. It just stood there as well, staring at me through my window. Then it cocked its head and motioned for me to come to it. I called it the Grey Man ever since this time, although it definitely had no discernible gender. Whatever it was, though, it was an animal terror unlike anything I have ever felt, but I found myself having to actively fight an almost uncontrollable impulse to go out to it. It was like it could almost compel me to go with it to the forest. After quite some time, I was able to pull myself away from the window and crawl back into bed. All I could do the rest of the night was wait for it to get tired of waiting, and I guess decide to come to me if it wanted. It never did, though, and when the sun finally came out, I couldn't, feel it anymore, I guess. This, though, was the new normal for me. Almost every night, it would come back and just wait and watch. The compulsion lessened eventually, though, which was really the only silver lining to this whole thing, I guess. I stopped sleeping a lot, and I would spend the nights in the living room as much as I could, which wasn't often. After quite some time of living with this thing appearing all the time in different places, it got closer at night as well. I don't have a total memory of this night exactly, or I guess I should say that I don't have a complete memory, I think. But after being plagued by this thing for quite a while, it was really getting to me, I guess. I wasn't sleeping, which affected lots of other areas of my life. This, in connection with a tumultuous environment, was quickly pushing me to a breaking point. One night, though, I awoke to this thing, something different, perched on the bottom railing of my bed. The only way that I can describe it was kind of like the faun from Pan's Labyrinth. It looked a lot different from that character, but it's as close to an analogue as I can come up with. It told me, though, that it would apparently get rid of the Grey Man for a price. The faun had a different energy to it than the Grey Man did, but I don't think it was something that was of good intent. a mild, almost predatory, opportunistic sort of thing, I guess. I was, however, desperate and exhausted, so whatever it wanted from me, for whatever price it required, I think I paid it in the end. I don't know if this was a dream or what, but it felt real at the time. What I can say, though, is that I was definitely awake for the Grey Man, that much I'm sure of. It did in the end keep up its end of the bargain, allegedly, and after that, my life did return to a kind of normal pace, I guess. Well, normal compared to that, I guess. I've been visiting my grandpa in Virginia to care for him recently. I grew up going to this house every month of my childhood. It's in Ivanhoe, Virginia, in the Appalachia. It's an abandoned mining town. Growing up in this house, built in 1853, I've always noticed out-of-the-ordinary stuff. For example, the room that I would always stay in faced the front porch, windows, with the rocking chairs. And one night I woke up to use the restroom, looked out the window, and I saw a black shadow figure sitting on the rocking chair, rocking it back and forth with long flowy hair. I heard a woman's humming, and at that I ran back under the covers and wrapped my head in the blankets, along with my toes until I could sleep. This wasn't the first time that I'd noticed that figure, but flash to other memories. There would be times in my sleep that I would try to sleep, and I'd hear the floors creak, and it always sounded as if something was coming closer. That's when all 9 of my grandfather's dogs started howling and barking. The creaking stopped, and then I heard a breathing or sighing noise, and the footsteps continued to walk, but this time walking away. This was all before I was 15, mind you. When I was 15, though, 21 now, I had a nightmare of the house burning down, and as I ran from the house, I could look back and see the shadow hovering over the fire. I woke up in a cold sweat and set up the cot in my grandpa's room. At 17 years old, I went to stay for Christmas with my mum. As we woke up, we shared the same bed. My mother went to the bathroom, has a sort of window overlooking into the Appalachian Mountains, and told me that she heard a humming coming from outside the window, and suddenly the bedroom door slammed shut. Then she told me about the dreams of the house burning, and this was the last incident until I went to care more recently for my grandfather with dementia and Alzheimer's. He wakes up at around 4 in the morning, and sometimes I have to bring him back to sleep. A week into the first time that I cared for him, he woke up at around 4 and sat in the rocking chair on the porch. I woke to the sensor lights beaming into my room, so I knew to go and get him. This time he had been talking to the empty rocking chair next to him, having a full-blown conversation, how the Confederate flag is mistaken for Southern pride or whatever. But I grabbed his hand and helped him up, when a woman's voice angrily said, what sounded like an inch behind me, "Let him stay, for it's cold." I turned around, freaked out, but there was nobody. Then the dogs began to howl again. I need to return soon again to care for him, but what am I dealing with here? What do I bring next time? Is this dangerous? What kind of thing am I experiencing here? When I was around 12, 2008 to 2009, my family, mother and father, and I went to visit some relatives, uncle, aunt, and cousin, in rural Tennessee. We were all sat in the living room just talking while the television played in the background. At some point, I went to use the restroom, but their restroom is situated to the left in a hallway past their kitchen. There are no doors directly adjacent to the restroom door, and I had a bit of a tendency in my youth to open the bathroom door before washing my hands, as to not recontaminate my hands and germs when I exited the restroom. So I used the restroom, opened the door, and as I was washing my hands, I saw someone walking by the door in the corner of my eye. I feel it's important to note that the figure was moving in the opposite direction of the living room. The only rooms in the direction the figure was heading are the 2 bedrooms of the house. Other than those rooms, the hallway is a dead end. I also feel it's important to note that I did not only see this figure in my peripheral vision. It was very slow moving, and the moment that it caught my eye, I turned my head. With both eyes looking directly at the doorway, I saw the figure move past the center of the door frame until it was out of sight to the left. This figure never once acknowledged my presence, stopped walking, or made any noise. The best description that I can give of the figure is that it was an elderly woman, hunched over. Not hunched far over, but in the way that many elderly people walk without being able to sort of straighten their backs. The figure was wearing a seafoam green sort of nightgown that wasn't very saturated, a very light seafoam green with an almost lacy sort of mesh kind of transparency to it, near the bottom of the dress, that is. Enough so that I remember taking note of being able to see the legs moving. The figure wore very thick and rounded square glasses with a transparent brown frame. She had tight, curly, permed, likely graying brown hair that was holding on to the last of its color. She was also a bit overweight, I would say. I saw her very vividly, though. Like, what I mean is that there was no transparency to her, nor was anything off about her. When I walked back into the living room, I asked the family who was there. All of the previously listed family members were still seated on their respective couches and chairs when I walked back into the living room. At this point, I was under the impression that an elderly relative of my relatives had arrived while I was in the restroom or whatever. But they all assured me that we were the only ones in the house and no one had come to visit after my parents and I. I doubled down, though, telling them that I just saw someone walk past the restroom door. I even described, probably crudely, the woman that I saw. My uncle immediately got up and began searching the house. He started in the back bedrooms and made his way to the living room, thoroughly searching every nook and cranny along the way. But, in the end, there was no one else in the house. I kind of dropped it after that. It was weird, but I guess it wasn't that scary, I suppose. I never once felt frightened, well, at the time at least. But we moved on with the day, and that night I was about to sleep in my cousin's room with him. I had never been in that room prior to this night. Once I walked in, I immediately noticed a picture hung on the wall, and my jaw almost dropped when it was the same woman that I saw. She had the same hairstyle, same glasses. She was the same size and had all the same features. I questioned him about this, and he told me that that was his grandmother, which I knew that they had gotten this house from, but it never clicked in my head. She died in the living room of old age, apparently. He told me that his room was her old room, and when his grandparents remodeled it for him, they left that picture up. At this point, I did get a little hesitant because he had a deer head mounted on the wall. I was a big fan of Evil Dead 2, and I knew if ghostly shenanigans were afoot, that thing was going to maniacally laugh at some point in the night, right? It didn't, though, and I slept soundly through the night and never saw or heard anything else. I've been to that house countless times since then and never seen or heard anything else. I've never seen another apparition anywhere that I know of, so that's my really unexplained event. I've told people I know countless times, but I've never really shared it like this online. I hope you enjoyed it, and it's something that has always stuck with me, and if anyone else has any thoughts or even similar experiences, then honestly, I would love to hear them. So last night, my girlfriend and I were laying in bed. We were both wide awake, chatting, when finally I turned the light off and rolled over to go to sleep. My dog, a German Shepherd, was laying on the floor right next to my side of the bed. A second after I rolled over, though, I heard a crystal clear whisper right in my ear coming from the direction of my girlfriend. not even half a second later, my dog spooks and starts barking at full volume at something in the room. It was the protector bark that she was clearly spooked as well. I honestly thought that my girlfriend whispered something to me, which set the dog off. So I rolled over and my girlfriend asked me if I heard the whisper too, because apparently she didn't say anything. The whisper sounded female and was very fast, so I couldn't make out what it said, but it was right in my ear and right in my girlfriend's ear apparently as well. For what it's worth as well, all windows were closed, our phones were in sleep mode, the neighbor's wall behind us is decently insulated, and the whole house was closed down and locked up for the night. We also just moved into this townhouse maybe 3 weeks ago. There aren't any pipes that run in the wall behind the bed, and the house was built in 1971. I did a sweep of the whole house afterwards, and as far as I could tell, everything was normal. I don't know what happened that night, but something tells me that there's something wrong with this place. What do you think I should do about it? So my grandma claims that she encountered 3 black-eyed kids. Apparently they asked her if they could come in. We have a garden with a balcony door which leads into the living room. They didn't look directly at her and they sort of stared at the floor at first. One of them asked her if they could use her phone to call their parents, and my grandma told me that she never felt such a dread but thought really nothing of it because, they were kids, right? She said yes in the end and let them in, and she told me that they finally looked at her with eyes that were so black that she'd never seen something like this ever in her life. She froze and just sort of watched them walk into our hallway, out of sight. Then my grandma followed after a second or two, and they were gone. They simply vanished into thin air. Now, she was genuinely scared and confused when she told me this. My grandmother, mind you, would never make up such things like this, or even talk about the paranormal in general, let alone having access to the internet and these types of stories, because she simply just doesn't understand how all of this works. Never really even used a computer in her life. She's a Turkish grandma from an older generation. I googled though and froze after reading about this phenomena. This happened about 7 years ago now, and the story always startles me every time I think about it. And honestly, I feel really sorry for my grandma because she's been really impacted by this in a negative way. This story happened last June or July. My family would always spend about a week up north around the same time every year, until just recently. My brother and I are getting older and schedules are getting in the way more frequently. We spend time at a bunch of different campgrounds in that time though, but each one we were always supplied with a cabin, rather than tents because Mum and I just aren't into that sort of nature, I guess. Anyways, we would be up there with a bunch of family members and we'd always have a good time. One of the first few days that we were up there, my immediate family was all sat down in the kitchen, enjoying breakfast when the topic of ghosts came up. Now, I've grown up believing in ghosts because of how prevalent they are in my family. I lived in a haunted place growing up. Parents have had strange encounters when they shared an apartment, etc. So this topic wasn't super unusual and always resulted in hearing some of the craziest ghost stories that we have. One of which was about my godmother's brother, or father. I'm not super sure actually, but I'll refer to him as Pete. So our family tends to have a lot of weird encounters involving family members or people that aren't strangers, so again, was super normal to talk about this topic at that time. For context, Pete lived a not so great life, I guess. Was very angry as well and sad, and that resulted in him taking his own life in his house. Now, the rest of this story is a bit fuzzy to me, but I'll tell what I know. So my godmother lived in this house for a while, and my parents, specifically my mum, would come and visit her. She said the energy in that house was always awful, especially by or in the walk-in pantry where he took his life. Pete was a very angry spirit, frequently pushing things around, dragging things across the living room and leaving a mess, etc. My parents made sure to tell him that he was not welcome. Fast forward a bit to when I was born. My godmother was a major part of my life. She helped babysit me when I was younger. She also babysat my own mum, and generally she was amazing with kids. She unfortunately passed away around 6 years ago now, and I miss her a lot. But my mum says that Pete used to follow her around and mess with things even when she moved, and that my mum had noticed that Pete was following her too. It wasn't as dramatic as the house, but little pieces of him seemed to sort of follow them around, I guess. Back to the cabin though. My parents told my brother, sister and I these 3 stories, which we'd heard before, and I remember me telling Pete off rudely at one point. Note too, don't be mean to ghosts, especially ones that are already mean. But we kept talking about the topic, and suddenly my left ear goes completely deaf, and my right ear starts very loudly ringing. I will say that I do get ringing in my ear sometimes, like most people do, right? But never in my life have I ever had an ear go completely deaf like this. The ringing got louder in my right ear, and then I heard a voice coming from right over my shoulder. It said Nana, with a deep, almost growl to it. Nana is what we called my godmother, by the way. I remember turning my head in confusion at hearing the voice. Then my left ear came back, and my right ear got extremely hot. I remember I wasn't really scared in the moment because of how normalized ghosts are to me, but it definitely freaked me out a bit later with all of the context. I told everyone at the table what happened, and nobody seemed to be fazed by it, which I know sounds weird, but again, we've been dealing with stuff like this for what seems like forever. But this is still one of my favorite paranormal stories to tell, and I wanted to ask all of you guys, what do you think it could have actually been? Skeptics and spiritual people are both welcome to comment, by the way, because I would honestly like to hear both sides. To give you some context, I come from a Mexican-American background. Although I was born in the United States, my parents were born in Mexico and spent most of their early years there as well. My mother also grew up in the Mexican countryside on a ranch where houses were scattered very far apart, and nighttime brought a pitch-black darkness that is hard to explain due to the absence of streetlights. Now one day, she was walking to a party with her brother and sister in the early afternoon when it wasn't as dark yet. As they made their way through the remote area, my mum happened to glance up at the sky and noticed a mysterious light moving about. She kept this sighting to herself, knowing all too well that it was rumored to be a witch, a common belief in many parts of Mexico. They get to the party and enjoyed the party, momentarily forgetting about the odd sight. However, when the party ended around midnight, they began their journey back home through the now pitch-black countryside, and halfway there, the inexplicable light appeared in the sky once more, and this time her siblings also saw it too. They continued walking in silence, not daring to mention the eerie sight to one another, when then, out of the blue, my mum tripped and turned to look behind her, catching a fleeting glimpse of a mysterious lady that apparently had been stalking them. Almost instantaneously, the figure then seemed to transform into a glowing light and descended into the sky, all of this happening in a matter of seconds. They couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched and followed after that for quite some time too. This is a story that my mother has told me over the years quite often, and I guess it's because it's something that just never really sat with her in the right way. This happened last week, and while she didn't seem malicious, the things that she said were definitely creepy. So I, a 19-year-old male, was going home to university, and to get home I have to use the train. As I got on, a lot of the seats were occupied, In my country, the seats are put in a way so that 4 people can talk and sit in front of each other, and they were kind of close, perfect for talking, even with strangers, sadly. But I see that there is a few spaces in front of this girl, who seemed about 1 or 2 years younger than me, but you never know, I guess. In any case, I go there and I ask her if I can sit down. Of course, she replied, and sort of looked at me in a strange, intense way. I pulled out my phone to distract myself from her. She also had a chocolate in her hand. That's going to be important for later, by the way. But she asked me, where do I live? And I was like, why do you have to know? She then asked when I'm going to get off the train. I told her the place, and she told me that she's getting off the next one. She then started singing, then said, oh, sometimes I sing. I'm just a silly girl. Then did it again. Whenever she said something, she sort of looked at me like she was waiting for a response, so I replied, it's okay to be silly if you want, because I just didn't want to talk to her. Then she told me that you're pretty, and when I asked, what do you mean? She asked if she's pretty. In my language, the second one is an extension of the first, so it seemed like she sort of corrected herself, I guess. Then she asked if she had chocolate on her face. She did. I also got the chocolate that she had offered to me, but I declined. She also told me about her piercing that came off, and she put it on in the middle of the train, apparently. I told her that she could get it fixed where she got it, and she said in German, will you go there with me? Obviously, I told her no. Well, she tried to get her piercing back in, her mouth piercing, that is. She then said that she was in love with me. I told her that I have a girlfriend. I don't, but the university I attend has much prettier girls than her, let me tell you, and that the piercing is too much for me. And she told me that she'll beat my girlfriend. She then said, I love you, and started escalating into, I'm going to kidnap you, and I'm going to strip you for me. She then asked if I would go with her and if she could go home with me. Then, when the train arrived at my destination, she asked me, are you going now, love? I told her yes, and I just went on my way, confused and not knowing what the heck was going on. Luckily, she didn't follow me home, which I was really grateful for. She also asked me when we're going to meet again, and honestly, hopefully never. I'd never been a big fan of camping before, but circa 2012, for some reason or another, my friend and I decided to take a Saturday night to camp on private property. We had permission from the owner, on the bank of a small lake in the rural American southeast. The lake wasn't very large, probably around 50 to 150 yards across. I'm not great at estimating distances though. It was more of a deep pond, I guess, but it was 5 times as long as it was wide, and from the perspective of our camp, it consumed the majority of our sightline. The plot of land itself wasn't entirely removed from civilization either. We were 5 or 10 miles outside of a small suburb of a mid-sized southern city. It definitely was not easy to access, however, and the only way in was a gated, narrow dirt road across a levee which spanned one side of the lake. This road was gated and locked. The owner gave us his code. We pulled the car through and locked the gate behind us. Now, if you've ever been down south, you know how quickly it gets isolated outside of cities. Our cities are small and the rural people around often live rough and wild. We have dense woods, so thick that they're really not worth building in unless you have some sort of connection or attachment to the area, I guess. I've heard it was not profitable to cut roads through a lot of it, in fact, when they were building highways in the 50s. So, not much development has happened in the last 100 years, and in some places since the Civil War even. Now, it's not uncommon to go for a 30-minute drive straight out of town and come upon cabins that are obviously off the grid. My friend and I were used to living in the suburbs, so we were just happy to see stars and hear the sounds of nature, I guess. We were at our very utilitarian camp, small Coleman 2-person tent and a blanket, simply looking around and enjoying the night when suddenly my buddy sat up real straight. He said something like, "Do you see that guy over there?" He pointed to the other side of the small lake. I didn't see anything. I sort of sat up slightly and said, "Nah, it's just the dark playing tricks on you, I think." He seemed actually shaken though. "No, look, there's a bunch of faces behind the trees now." That got my attention, and I sat up fully at this point, rubbing my eyes to try and gain full focus. And then I saw them. Small, round, white faces staring back at me from across the lake. Maybe 15 or 20 of them. All of them were positioned in such a way that their bodies were behind the trees and only their heads were visible. The best way that I could describe the faces were like very pale, somehow internally illuminated children. I should mention that neither of us were drinking or high. We were too young for that, not for at least a few more years anyway. We had eaten dinner at home and we were just planning on going to sleep after chilling out for a while. The faces, they weren't moving though. I was kind of sitting there in shock, thinking that my eyes were just adjusting and I would see that they were a reflection, bugs or owls or something, but I would just never come to that realization. I stared right back at them for what felt like 5 minutes, looked back at my friend, and then suddenly, they were just gone. Bodies of water carry sound extremely well, and we heard extensive shuffling from the other side of the lake, and a couple of small branches snap as well. It's incredible what your ears pick up on during an otherwise silent night like this. My buddy was tearing up a little when he said, "What the heck were those?" And I didn't have a good answer. Neither of us slept particularly well that night. I definitely felt validated in my feelings of disliking camping, but I mean, what were we going to do in a situation like this? In the end, we woke up early, we packed up quickly, and we just left. I tried to do some research on the internet, but I never found a phenomenon that would explain this, which is why I'm here. Do you have any theories as to what this could have been? This happened years ago now, but I still think about it pretty often. My 3 little sisters, their dad and I, were standing in the checkout line at the grocery store. My younger sister couldn't have been older than like a year, so I was 10 and holding her on my hip. A middle-aged woman joined the line behind us. She was trying to get my baby sister's attention over my shoulder, just sort of cooing and baby talking to her. I figured her an obvious baby lover, so I turned us towards her slightly as a polite gesture, only for her to start moving closer and holding out her hands. It was all happening so fast, I almost couldn't react, but I had just enough time to give her a panicked look as she reached out to take her from me, and I shouted, "Excuse me, don't touch her, get away from us." The way she approached us, it was like she wanted to take her almost, or take her somewhere. At the same time, my stepdad took a step in between us and this crazy woman, asking her what she thinks she was doing. She just got really sheepish all of a sudden and tried to laugh it off almost. Instead of backing up though, she made her way past us and then proceeded to try and cut us in line. I think my stepdad would have exploded if not for the cashier giving this lady a glare and waving us forward. She left us alone after that, and it was super awkward. But the whole experience left us all quite shaken. The woman gave me a really off vibe from the start, and I'm really not sure what her intentions were. I think she probably just thought that I would allow her to hold my sister for some insane reason, like give over a baby to a stranger, but who knows. In any case, it still gives me the creeps when I think about it. So I'm 19, engaged, and have 2 kids of my own. Me, my fiance, and our kids are currently living with her parents as we can't really afford a place of our own right now. About a year ago, her sister as well as her 4 kids and husband also lived with us. They honestly are not at all the greatest parents. I mean, they let their kids get away with anything pretty much, but when they started living here, they changed because none of us were going to be that way with them. I've been with my fiancée for 4 years now, and her nieces and nephews know me very well. They also refer to me as uncle at times. Their oldest daughter, 4 but was 3 at the time, has always been a bit of a troublemaker, and she still kind of is, I guess. But there came a period of time when they lived with us that she was just awful, like crazy aggressive and super defiant. I'm not saying that she was or is possessed, but I do believe that at that time something was affecting her behavior negatively. A few other things were happening at that time too. Our youngest daughter was still in a crib at the time and slept in our room. I know that a sign of spirits or entities is cold spots, right? Well, her crib always seemed to be super cold, as well as the area around it in comparison to the rest of the room. She also had a period of time where she kept seemingly waking up in the middle of the night for no reason. It almost seemed like, in a way, somebody or something was annoying her or trying to play with her. My niece also kept talking about seeing a huge, large man in the corner at night. Keep in mind, though, that there is no furniture or toys or anything should possibly mistake for a person like that. She would wake up screaming, though, and terrified, refusing to go back into the bedroom, and she'd just point to the corner. Then her father spoke up and claimed to have seen a shadow figure multiple times in her bedroom too. He tried to claim that it was possibly his grandfather that had recently passed away. I didn't say anything, but I knew that that couldn't be true, mainly because shadow figures are often non-human entities, not friendly human spirits. And I personally also had one experience as well. One night I fell asleep on the couch in the basement, which isn't far from the kids' bedroom. I woke up seeing a young boy dressed in beaten and old clothes, almost as if he was homeless. He was maybe only a couple of centimeters away from my face at that point, but when I blinked, he was gone. Our oldest also randomly started saying that she was seeing monsters at night, which she'd never said before. Me and my fiancé are not at all religious, but thought that we'd give holy water a shot. And amazingly, it seemed to have stopped things and nobody has seen anything since. They've also moved out since then and have been on their own for about 8 months now. But what do you think? Spirits, coincidence, or maybe just a kid's imagination? So I work at a mediocre hotel in a random town in Ohio. It's not beautiful or historical or massive or anything. In fact, there's really not anything special about it. But my co-workers joke around about it being haunted because there's one room people just get weird vibes in, and the old elevator most housekeepers use opens and closes slowly on its own at random times when nobody is on it. I personally have experienced some weird things that have convinced me the hotel definitely has something weird going on inside of it. I haven't told my co-workers these stories, but I'm sure some of them know a few themselves already. My most unexplainable story that I really haven't shared yet took place in room 217. So I was in this person's room tidying things up while they were away at a meeting or whatever, and I just instantly knew that something was off. I thought that I was just uncomfortable because the temperature was set at 90 degrees, but maybe it was something else. Whatever the case, after I made sure that there was no one in the room, I started making the bed. When that was done, I walked into the bathroom and bent down over the tub to grab the used washcloths. As I'm bent down, that's when an old lady said, "Thank you," clear as day, like she was right beside me. She had a couple of more words after that, still clear as day, but for some reason, and without looking behind me, I walked right out of that room expecting to see an older woman standing in the doorway. Maybe she was thanking me for cleaning her room, but didn't want to come in all the way. But no, there was absolutely nobody there. Maybe she's in the hallway. No one there either. I got spooked instantly, and I ran into the nearest housekeeping closet after that. I've gone over all the possibilities, like maybe the TV, but no, the TV was on mute and it was a man talking about the weather. Maybe it came from another room. No there either. I just went in all of these rooms and everyone is away for the meeting. Did something play on my headphones? I wasn't wearing my headphones. None of it made sense, and I refused to go back into that room after that. Another thing that messes with my head is that many people have died in this hotel over the years. I had 2 people overdose in a room I was scheduled to clean that day, and I know that there's been more cases, and I just wasn't in the room to hear about it. Weird thing is that I never saw the cops show up, never heard any firemen, so what actually happened to the bodies? It's a little bit unsettling to think about, I guess. There's this college across the street that does events here multiple times a year as well. Apparently at almost every event, one of the college freshman kids go missing as well. This latest one was last seen exiting the building through the main lobby with nothing with him and getting into a car. And he, still to this day, hasn't been found. He left all of his stuff in his room and didn't take his phone with him or anything. It's all just really unsettling, and I don't know what to make of any of it. Okay, so let me start by saying that I've never really been sure in the afterlife. I'm one of those I have to see it to believe it kind of people. But my parents tell me that when I was really young, I apparently used to see ghosts. They say that at one point, I got so scared that I asked all the ghosts to go away until I was 30. I don't really remember any of this, so I always assumed that I just had a vivid imagination or whatever. But apparently it worked and they stopped showing up immediately, according to my parents anyway. Well, I turned 30 last year at about 6 months into the year, and they came back. Well, one did at least. I couldn't sleep, I was just laying there awake, and I figured that I'd get up and walk around the house a little bit. And you know when you get that feeling that someone is standing right behind you? I had it so strongly, and I just assumed it must be my roommate behind me. I think I felt the floorboards move a little, and that's how I knew that someone was there, so I turned around fully expecting to be my roommate there, but it wasn't. It was this shadow in the shape of a person, like a person just made of darkness. They were about a foot shorter than me, and they looked pretty large in weight. I just stood there, looking at them kind of dumbfounded. I remember saying, "Oh my God," and I guessed that they were looking at me because they paused for a moment, then they walked around me. I turned as they walked around me and watched them head towards the stove. Once they got to the stove, they vanished into thin air. I couldn't go to bed after that. I spent the rest of the night wide awake just thinking about what I had just seen. But it's hard to believe that after all these years, I finally know the truth. Ghosts are real. Maybe an afterlife is even real. You think that I would be scared, but I'm actually kind of excited. I kind of want to see more of them, and I sort of hope that they show up again soon. I guess I've always been a bit of a weirdo that way. I've never been afraid of the dark or typical things that other people are afraid of. I wonder if I'm supposed to be a medium or something. Does anyone have any tips on how to pursue this further and strengthen this ability if that's what it is? Also, has anyone else seen one? Did they look like a shadow person to you too? What did you do about it? And what should I do? So it's 2012. I had just graduated high school and my brother moved from Florida to Maryland to maintain foreclosures in the Maryland and DC area. I spent my 2 summers between college to work for him, giving him a little break, running his crew around, moving, changing locks, cleaning the house, and taking pictures, etc. Our routes sent us around DC, and he often put together the morning of early and then browsed Daily Mail and other articles. He somehow stumbled across an article about how the movie Exorcist was inspired by this property in DC on Bunker Hill Road, which we just so happened to maintain one of the neighbors' properties. Now, that day it was my brother and myself, and we decided that we would stop by where the old 3-story house once stood. To be honest, I don't know what was there. I knew of the movie of The Exorcist, but never been in scary movies, so didn't really know much about it, I guess. Well, the house where the 14-year-old boy lived in 1949, where The Exorcist was performed, was no longer there. Today it's a normal-looking historic street with older homes and this vacant lot with some trees and nice grass and all that. It's now a park and even has signs about no entry between dusk to dawn. On the property where the house sat is a pavilion for the public shaped in a sort of octagon. If I remember, maybe raised 3 feet off the ground with a sort of wraparound ramp. Around the ramp were bushes that circled the pavilion. So we decided to walk up there. It was quiet and nothing seemed eerie or strange as we walked up to the ramp. But this was about where it gets odd. So we walk up the ramp and to the center of the pavilion, and not until we actually are in the pavilion, nearly dead center, was when we heard buzzing. Not just like a little fly or a bee flying, but hundreds of insects, which we assumed were flies, began to buzz all in unison from around the entire pavilion. It was very loud and noticeably a swarm in the bushes. They didn't seem to fly around either, so we just stood there and looked around, then at each other, and we were kind of shocked, and we didn't stay after that. Bugs are totally normal, I get that, but I don't get why they didn't make a sound as we walked up the ramp or around the pavilion as we were so close to the bushes. And I mean, heck, I've maintained several properties and never experienced anything like that in Mother Nature, or anywhere for that matter. Those summers I experienced ground bees to spiders to voodoo in basements, books on spells and witchcraft, glass orbs, crystal balls, trap houses. I mean, we even explored the haunted abandoned insane asylum up there, but something about that moment, it just doesn't sit right with me and it still freaks me out. I mean, it was an insanely loud buzz, like nothing I'd ever heard before, and really, it must have been an absolute mountain of insects to make that sort of noise. And with the amount of insects that were around, that just didn't make any sense. So I was 16 when this happened. I was also working at the place where dreams go to die, Walmart. I obviously hated working there, but thankfully this encounter was the straw that broke the camel's back. Another thing that I should mention too is that I look a few years younger than I actually am. I have a bit of a baby face, so even though I was 16, I looked about 13. It was during the day when the incident happened. It was a pretty slow day, and I'd spent most of my shift wandering around, helping where I could. I was already done with everything in my department. I was in the middle of heading back to my area when a man approached me. He was a bit of a creepy dude, but I didn't want to be rude by not helping him, even though everything in me was telling me to walk away. But creepy guy was asking me to help him find a gift for his niece or something, so I asked him if he had any idea what he wanted to get his niece, and he said that he wasn't sure, so I took him to the kids section so that he could choose something. While I was browsing, he started asking for my name, if I lived in the city, how old I was, that sort of thing. I obviously wasn't overly keen on providing this information, so I was pretty vague when answering. Other times I'd completely avoid the question altogether and try to redirect a conversation to his niece. It was evident, though, that he wasn't interested in discussing his niece, so he provided one-worded answers and went right back to his intrusive questioning. He started asking me more personal stuff too, like if I had a boyfriend, if I'd ever had sex before. Now, I was horrible at communicating when someone crossed a boundary. I hated confrontation, and my managers sucked really badly. They'd give me all sorts of trouble for the stupidest things, which made me really anxious whenever I had to talk with them. As a result, I did everything I possibly could to avoid talking with them. Anyway, I asked if there was anything else that he needed. I just wanted to hurry and end this whole interaction. But of course, he told me that he needed a card and a bag to put the gift in. So I begrudgingly directed him to the card section. All the while, he upped the creep factor and began asking me extremely personal questions. He was now giving me compliments too. He'd tell me how beautiful I was, how I had such a great-looking butt. Keep in mind, I don't look a day over 13, and he knew my age too, and yet that didn't seem to stop the creep from making these crude remarks. While he picked out a bag and a card, I kept my distance, but I remember he kept giving me, the best that I can equate it to is bedroom eyes. It made me sick to my stomach, but I figured that he'd eventually get everything that he needed, and he'd be on his merry way. He eventually got a card and a bag, and he asked me to lead him to the till, since he didn't know where they were. Obviously he did, but I just sucked it up and directed him to the checkouts. When we got within walking distance of a till, I politely excused myself and felt relieved to finally get rid of him. Unfortunately, though, he ran ahead of me and asked for my number, even going as far as making this horrible comment. It was, "I like my girls nice and young. They can just keep going and going. You and I will have lots of fun." That made my skin absolutely crawl. I told him that I didn't have a phone. I did, of course, and it was sitting in my vest pocket, but he thankfully didn't seem to notice it. I was beyond paranoid, though, that he'd spot the phone and call me out on my lies. Despite being repeatedly told that I, in fact, did not have a phone, he kept insisting that I give him my number or a social media where he could contact me. It got to the point where I was backing away from him because he'd gotten so close to me. I could even smell his breath. Unsurprisingly, he didn't take the hint and kept inching towards me. I want to know the real punch to the gut, though? I had a couple of managers walk past, and they definitely saw this guy harassing an underage employee, and they did nothing to help. I was getting desperate. No one was coming to my aid, which made me feel hopeless on top of it. I thought that I'd never get rid of this guy, but my saving grace was my manager walking through the front door before the creep got handsy with me. My manager was my absolute favorite person. He was pretty intimidating, used to serve in the military. He was a pretty big guy as well, pure muscle. Could probably break me in two with one hand if he wanted to, but he was a total gentle giant. Whenever customers got rowdy with the employees, he'd always intervene. It was always hilarious too to see people who were red in the face deflate the moment that they saw him approaching. I spotted my manager though and gave him a look of desperation when he glanced over at me, and I cannot tell you how relieved I felt when I saw him make a beeline for us. He placed himself between me and the creepy dude, slapped on his customer service smile, and asked if he could assist the creep since I was supposed to be on my break. I happily took the hint and practically ran to the back of the store. I went to the staff room and was shaking from the adrenaline and on the verge of crying. I was in the staff room for about 20 minutes before my manager called me into the office. He asked if I was okay, and I said that I was shaken up but fine. He assured me that he'd have me working in the back for the next week, just to ensure that if the creep came back looking for me, he wouldn't be able to find me. He then told me that the guy kept asking where I went and what my number was, what my name was, but my manager told him that he couldn't release that information. My manager literally escorted the guy out of the store and watched him drive away before coming back to talk with me. Thankfully, I never did see the guy again. Then again, I left my previous job shortly after this encounter. I got another offer to work with my best friend at her dad's restaurant after I told her what happened, which I happily took. I admit that I was a little sad to leave, mainly because I really did adore my manager, but my hatred for Walmart and my fear of that dude was ultimately what pushed me to leave. So I, a 23-year-old female, have been living at my house since I was born. 7 years back, we constructed a new outhouse with minimal furniture, which is probably about 20 meters away from the main home. Since construction, I've used the outhouse more than any of my other family members to study and attend online lectures to avoid getting distracted. But ever since 2021, I've witnessed subtle oddities, I guess you could say, during my time there. For instance, on January of 2021, the wall clock suddenly stopped at around 4:20. My mum and I changed the batteries and it started working, so no big deal. But the next day it stopped at about 4 again. So I bought a new clock with new batteries and hung it on the wall. It worked well for a couple of days, but it stopped working again. Frustrated, we bought one more clock, inserted new batteries, worked for a couple of days again, and it stopped again at 4:10. All three stopped clocks are still in this house, and we gave up, and since 2021 there have been no working clocks in the house. It almost feels like, I don't know, time doesn't exist when I enter this house to do my tasks. Whereas the clocks in the main house work as usual. There's no issues here at all. Although we found it strange, my family didn't think much about the incident and went ahead with our life. I mean, it's just a few clocks after all. I did do some Googling to find the spiritual meaning behind stopping clocks though, especially around 4, after what I'm about to tell you, but nothing turned out. So anyway, I moved away from my house to pursue higher studies in a different city. I didn't experience any weird things there, and returned on August of 2022. I started using the outhouse again for studying and preparing for my exams. As I finished my task for the day, I went ahead to turn off the lights and suddenly I felt a slight tap on my upper arm. I completely lost my balance and hit myself against the wall. But again, I thought to myself, it must have just been me being clumsy or drowsy or something, and went back to the main house to sleep. But the incident that happened 2 days ago drove me to share this with you guys. So I finished studying at around 8 p.m. at night, like I usually do. I turned off the lights, and just before I stepped outside the door to lock it, I felt someone or something whisper in my ear. Although I didn't see anything visually, it sounded sort of like gibberish, and whatever it was, it whooshed past me. I even felt a waft across my face like air was being moved, and at that, I rushed outside, locked the door, and I went back to my main house to sleep. I didn't discuss the incident with my family members because I would definitely get laughed at, said that it was all in my head. But I don't understand what I've been experiencing here. Is this what a haunting is? Should I be more aware of spiritual stuff like this, or am I just overthinking it all? What do you guys think? So this was very recent, 6 days ago to be exact. For some context too, I've struggled with seeing and hearing things that are not real since I was a kid, and have had help over the years for it. Now, I'm a huge fan of hiking, or just simply taking walks in the woods. The only time that I go alone is when I'm in the woods that I live near. This day though, I wasn't. I was with my friend Lars in a walk about 3 hours from my house. We were planning on traveling around and staying at motels in the meantime, and that day we decided to take a walk in a popular area for people who like to walk in the woods like me. The catch was that these woods were huge, which wasn't really a problem for us though, because we liked it. In fact, we were thrilled. There wasn't really much to it though. I mean, it was pretty, we escaped the crowd, but every now and then we would see someone walking by. There really wasn't much to it in the end, though. I mean, it was pretty. We escaped the crowd, but every now and then we would see someone walking by. We walked for a while until we got to this spot, not too different from the rest, except for one thing. Nobody else was around in this section all of a sudden. That's why me and Lars took this turn. The other turn had a few people there, and after a while of walking down this path, we spotted a man. A naked man. We gave each other a look and sort of turned around. The man was slightly off the path, bent over and looking at something. As me and Lars were walking back, talking about the strange man, I heard a voice behind me. I turned to see the man. He was talking to us about the bug that he picked up. I got a good look at him at this point. He was pretty tall, nothing crazy, but bald with a few brown hairs beginning to grow, but like I said, completely naked. I flashed the man a brief smile and I sped up, so as not to disturb him, I guess. We got out of that place as fast as we could, and once we got to the car, we just kind of laughed it off. I mean, yes, it was creepy, but more weirdly funny, I guess you could say. The car ride was nothing, so skip to the motel. As we're checking in at the motel, we see the same man walk in. He was a little harder to recognize, considering the fact that he now had clothes on and all that, just torn up clothes. But he waited behind us in line. Good thing we were almost done too, checking in, because as soon as we did, we went right to our room and locked it without a second thought. This was definitely creepy. I mean, was he following us, or was it just a coincidence? We both decided that we weren't going to stay at this hotel for more than a night. Heck, I wouldn't have stayed even one night if Lars weren't there telling me that it was okay. That night, though, Lars wanted to go outside for a cigarette at one point. I don't smoke, but no way was I going to stay in this room alone. I followed him outside, and we chatted for a bit. After a few minutes, I see the guy walk out of the door. Lars put out his cigarette and began to walk inside. But before we got in, the guy pulled out what was probably a knife or something else sharp. It was dark, so I couldn't really see, but it was something sharp, and started carving through his sleeve and right at his arm. I saw liquid, or what I thought was liquid, trickling to the ground and immediately knew that this was probably blood. I rushed into the lobby and Lars got the idea and followed, and we alerted the staff, but by the time that they got someone to come out, he was gone. To this day, I still have so many questions about that time. Did he follow us? Why the heck was he naked? Why was he doing that to himself in the first place? I guess I'll probably never really know the answers, but honestly, I'm still spooked by all of this. I don't know what I'll do if I ever see him again, but man, I sure do hope that never happens. So nearly a year ago, on Christmas, I was at my dad's with some of my siblings. We celebrated Christmas, and then after dinner, my dad headed off to be with his girlfriend at her apartment. Left in the house were my 16-year-old uncle, my 16-year-old brother, me who was 15, and the youngest who was a toddler. I woke up early in the next morning, and it was the day after Christmas. I sat on the floor beside an outlet on my tablet. Everybody else was still sleeping, and then I heard a banging on the back door. I thought it was my dad coming back, but the banging got louder and went on for too long. For lack of a better term, I think I disassociated, didn't know really what to do, and couldn't move until I heard the back door break all of a sudden. I had been paranoid about home invasions due to our area in the city before, but I had no idea what to do and just sort of stood there in shock. I put down my tablet and picked up a nearby flashlight. I think to throw at whoever broke in, I guess, but when the back door had given out, I heard him go quickly through the downstairs, stomp up the stairs, and then he was right outside of the door of the room that I was in. The man opened the door, turned left, and then turned right, where he saw me sitting on the floor, beside the outlet, less than 3 feet away from him. He was taller than my dad, and wore completely black and a ski mask as well. He held a big, rusty-ish crowbar that had a blue handle. He was wide and looked on the older side. I took a small breath and screamed louder than I ever have, and I held it for at least 20 seconds. Once I screamed, he screamed a bit too, and then ran downstairs and out of the house. I went to the top of the staircase, after he was already down them obviously, and out the hallway, and I yelled, "Please leave," as loud as I could. Looking back on this, asking a house invader to leave is pretty useless, I know, because he already was leaving, and also because, he broke in, right? But I just wasn't thinking straight. My screaming, though, woke up my uncle and my older brother. I wasn't wearing pants, so I put on pants quicker than I ever had, while telling my older brother what had just happened as he was half awake and confused. I ran downstairs, and my uncle had just come from his room in the basement. I quickly told him someone had broken in and left after I screamed. He already had a knife and told me to grab one too. I did, and after making sure the robber had left the house and checking quickly on the toddler who was somehow still sleeping, we relaxed a bit. My uncle told me to guard the back door and stab anyone who comes through while he checked the area outside the neighborhood to see if the robber was gone or where he went. I held the knife and stood beside the broken back door, knowing that if someone came back, I couldn't really do anything, as I'd never really fought before, and really I was just a kid holding a kitchen knife. So I just held the knife in hopes that they wouldn't come back, and thankfully they didn't. My uncle came back and said that they must have had a driver, since there was no way that he could get away that fast on foot. None of us had phones, so my older brother called my dad over Instagram on a tablet to tell him what happened. We explained what happened, and when Dad was 10 minutes away via car, he hung up. While we all sat and waited for my dad, we talked and realized that this was likely all planned. The invader came when there was no car in the driveway, and after entering, he ran directly upstairs, ignoring the new Christmas presents, an alcohol collection, and even 2 gaming consoles smack dab in the middle of the living room that he had just run through. He went directly for my dad's room, where me and my older brother were. My dad collects valuable shoes and has some expensive watches that he keeps in his closet, and only someone friends with my dad who had been in the house before could have known that. In any case, when my dad came back, he asked me over and over about how the intruder looked, and I just told him again and again while he and my uncle tried to think of which friend it could have been. I was the only one who saw the guy and had been less than 3 feet away from me. I was in direct physical danger from some stranger that I think that I'd never met. We didn't actually call the cops in the end, as the police in our area and city are known for being more than unhelpful. But as Christmas was getting closer again, I was worried about being back there around the same time the person broke in. I've had a harder time sleeping, and I've been more and more paranoid. I understand I was and am very lucky that I wasn't hurt, and all we got was a broken back door in the end, but I still honestly hate the person who broke in. And I sure hope that whoever he is, that he gets caught soon. So I live in northeast New Mexico, and we're known to be a skinwalker hotspot. But I've always heard the stories and just joked about it, really. But lately, I just don't know anymore. You see, I've been hearing sounds of like howling, heavy breathing, and yipping out of my window. But when I look, there's never anything there. This has been going on for several months now, and it was never any bother to me, until recently, I guess. You see, a couple of days ago, I heard the sounds inside of my house, along with footsteps. I immediately thought that it was an intruder, obviously, so I grabbed my cig and started making a sweep of the house. I checked every room, but I didn't find anything. My house is single story, and there's a small crawl space above the ceiling, but the only way to get into it is an attic door that I keep locked at all times. It could have been a small animal, I think, but it sounded like it was at least 150 pounds. Animals near my house have different behavior than in Texas, the only other state that I've lived in too, so obviously it's a different environment and all that, but I used to see animals standing still in front of my Ring doorbell, just looking at it for like several minutes. It's been about 2 months since this last happened, but When it did happen, it was around twice a month, I would guess. In other instances, I've had squirrels climb on the sills and look through my windows. This happens near weekly, and just the other day I saw a hummingbird just sort of chilling in front of my window for about 30 seconds. I do have 2 dogs, Snoop and Riley. I started to keep them inside because they would start barking at random stuff in the dark, and it would spook the cows and wake us up. But I was hanging out with a friend, and we were on a walk after sitting for several hours watching TV. It's fairly dark outside, probably about 9 or 10 p.m. I would guess, and he wanted to see my deer blind as we're both into hunting. We walked out there and talked for a bit before starting our walk back. But about a third of the trip back, we started hearing my dogs barking, owls hooting, and the horses acting weird. It all started at the same time as well and ended at the same time. A little while later, there was what I can only describe as rustling in the grass about 40 feet in front of us. Both me and my buddy noticed it. It looked pretty large, about the size of a bear, and only the back of it was exposed, but it was dark, and the weirdest thing is that it was almost hairless. I started to back away slowly, and it stopped moving for a second before just scurrying off into the woods. It didn't have a tail, whatever it was, and obviously I didn't get a real good look at its head, but its body was, I don't know, kind of like a dog's, I would guess. In any case, we made it back to the house and talked for a bit before he started his drive home. But what do you guys think? Is this a skinwalker, or is this some other animal that I'm just not aware of? If so, what can I do to get rid of this thing? It's not good for the livestock for sure, and it's scaring them a lot. And to be frank, it scares me a lot too.